Chapter 1831. After being scolded by Zhang Feng, Zhang Sunchong and Du Go looked at each other embarrassedly and became more well-behaved. After all, Feng Zi was in charge of the hot air balloon and they didn't dare to disobey. However, they still couldn't help but feel happy. The two of them leaned on the edge of the basket and admired the beautiful scenery. They kept pointing there. After all, this was their first time in the sky and curiosity filled their whole body. Cheng Chumo was the same. He didn't succeed in showing off just now, so he could only lie on the side and admire the scenery. He was still fantasizing about how to show off in front of Li Chengqian and his dad. The hot air balloon was getting higher and higher, but because of the weight, it rose relatively slowly. Beautiful scenery appeared in front of everyone's eyes. There was a green grassland underground, a mountain not far away, plum blossoms standing proudly in the snow, reindeer foraging for food, and so on. Look, there are reindeer on that mountain? Zhang Sunchong pointed at a mountain not far away and beamed with joy. Isn't that MB? Zhang Feng rolled his eyes at Zhang Sunchong and said in a bad mood. They just flew up from this mountain and these guys didn't recognize it in such a short time? Oh. Zhang Sunchong scratched his head embarrassedly, causing everyone to burst into laughter. Okay, we've seen enough. Zhang Feng glanced at everyone and then looked at Cheng Chumo. Tai Niu, look down. If there's no one, throw a sandbag down. We should go back. He was a little hungry and needed to go down and eat something first. Feng Zi, don't be in such a hurry. Cheng Chumo smiled and then looked at Zhang Sunchong and Du Go. He deliberately winked at them. You see, it's still early. Why don't we go somewhere else? It was not easy for him last time, and he did not want to go down so easily. More importantly, he had not had enough fun and had not shown off enough. If he went to Chang, and with such a good thing, he would be able to show off. Most importantly, he would be able to gain face, and his reputation as a foppish playboy might be washed away. Zhang Sunchong also understood and smiled in front of Zhang Feng. Yeah, Feng Zi, it's still early. Don't you want to play? For example, go to Chang and City to see the scenery. Yeah, Chang and City is now the most lively time. Don't you want others to see your hot air balloon? Sing praises of your talent? Du Go licked his face and tried to please Zhang's face because he wanted to go to Chang. As long as he was there, he could take the opportunity to show off and let others know that Chang and's famous playboy was better. You want to go to Chang? Zhang Feng looked at them with a faint smile. In fact, he had seen through their thoughts just now. Moreover, these guys were good at licking his boots and he enjoyed it very much. It wasn't that he couldn't go to Chang'an, but after experimenting for so long, his stomach was already bulging. Eating was more important. Of course. Cheng Chumo smiled and said, Feng Zi, think about it. You made such a divine object. Wouldn't it be a pity if you don't go to Chang'an? Yeah, madman. Don't you want to see the prosperity of Chang, and let the people see your flying divine object? Zhang Sunchumo rushed to the side and incited incessantly. It could be said that he wanted to go to Chang'an the most. He was a member of the royal family and didn't have any achievements. If he rode such a divine object to Chang'an, it would make Zhang Sunchumo's family proud. Even his father could straighten his back when he entered the palace in the future. Go to Chang? Zhang Feng stroked his chin and showed a proud smile. Obviously, the words of these three people just now were very useful to him. Talent? Merit? Admiration of thousands of people? It was not impossible to go. He touched his growling belly and said with a wry smile, I also want to go, but my stomach is not living up to my expectations. After doing the experiment for so long, he had been hungry for a long time. If it weren't for waiting to go to heaven, he might have already eaten to his heart's content. Isn't it just hunger? Go to Chang. You can eat anything in Chang. Cheng Chumo patted his chest generously, as if these were not a problem for him. Yeah, Feng Zi, think about it. You will have a lot of face in Chang, and if you ride such a divine object. Not to mention eating, won't you be able to choose the dragon liver and phoenix marrow in the palace? Zhang Sunchumo was very good at adding fuel to the fire and kept inciting him. Zhang Feng nodded. He was very happy with these guys' flattery. Okay, let's go to Chang and have a look. Mainly, he also wanted to go to Chang and to have a look. Otherwise, these incitements would be useless. After all, he hadn't been there for a long time. Besides, since this hot air balloon was made, he had to open the eyes of the people. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but show a trace of pride on his face. He waved his hand and imitated the posture of Captain Jack. Set sail, destination Cheng. Okay. Seeing that Feng Zi was interested, Cheng Chumo deliberately played along. He said with a smile, Captain, what should we do next? Stupid. Zhang Feng secretly spat. He pointed to the front and smiled. Of course, throw a sandbag to adjust the direction. Chapter 1832. As soon as he finished speaking, he seemed to have thought of something and added, remember to check if there's anyone. Don't smash anyone to death. Smash someone to death? Cheng Chumo frowned and said in surprise, that can't be, right? A small sandbag can smash someone to death? Nonsense, of course it can smash someone to death. Zhang Feng slapped the back of Cheng Chumo's head and said with a serious face, if you throw it from such a high place, even if you don't die, you will be seriously injured. He clearly remembered that in the future, there were many people who threw heavy objects from high up in the sky, implicating innocent passers-by and causing them to be smashed to death on the spot. When he saw this scene, he couldn't help but curse the person who threw the heavy objects from high up in the sky. But it was different now. There was no such situation here. Thinking back, a person could be smashed to death from a height of more than 10 meters, not to mention a height of a few hundred meters. There was also a 5-kilogram sandbag. If it was thrown down and met someone, they would be smashed to death on the spot. That was why he was so serious. Cheng Chumo saw Zhang Feng's serious face. Although he did not know why, he still did as he was told. After all, he still wanted to go to Chang and to show off. He glanced down. The layers of clouds were somewhat unclear. After a while, the clouds dispersed. After confirming that there was no one, he threw down a sandbag. Feng Zi, the sandbag has been thrown down. What do we do now? Cheng Chumo asked with a happy face. One word, wait. Zhang Feng smiled and glanced at the beautiful scenery in the sky. Why do we have to wait? Zhang Xuan's face was a little ugly. It was not easy to persuade this guy to go to Chang. Now they had to wait? Don't we need you to control the direction for me? Zhang Feng rolled his eyes at everyone. Now the hot air balloon is slowly changing direction. With the wind, we should be able to float to Chang in a while. Okay, whatever you say. Du Go repeatedly agreed. Right now, they could be said to be obedient to Zhang Feng's words. This was because Feng Zi was the only person who knew about hot air balloons. Without this guy, how could they go to Chang? Zhang Feng was very satisfied with everyone's attitude. He sat in the basket and waited for the hot air balloon to float in the air. A cold wind blew, and the hot air balloon began to float in the direction of Chang. A group of ant-like people began to appear in front of everyone's eyes. Feng Zi, look, what's that? Don't they look like ants? Zhang Sun pointed at the crowd on the ground. He was a little surprised. He had never seen such a scene and thought they were ants. Idiot, what are you talking about? That's just an ant. Cheng Chumo slapped the back of Zhang Xuan's head. He spoke in a tone as if Zhang Feng was lecturing him. Cheng Chumo was probably angered by Zhang Feng and wanted to vent his anger on Zhang Sun. I think you're all idiots. Zhang Feng rolled his eyes at everyone and said angrily, those are people. We're about to reach the sky above Chang and city. These are the people of Chang and city. Cheng Chumo's eyes widened in disbelief. Those are people? Why are they so small? Yeah, why do they look like ants? Feng Zi, do you think we're easy to bully? Du Go glanced at the ground. His eyes were full of disbelief. In his knowledge, everyone was about the same size. Why did they look so small now? They were almost the size of an ant. You can only blame your ignorance. Zhang Feng glanced at everyone and put on a knowledgeable look. His face was full of pride. Have you heard of two children arguing? Cheng Chumo frowned and nodded. Then, he seemed to think of something and shook his head. Have you heard of it? What do you mean by nodding and shaking your head? Zhang Feng was a little unhappy and frowned. I have never heard of it. Cheng Chumo scratched his head and was a little embarrassed. I've heard of it. Zhang Sun smiled and glanced at Qing Chumo. He was quite proud. Then he looked at Zhang Feng and asked, "What does this have to do with two children arguing?" "It's the same principle as two children arguing. We're farther from the ground, so the people on the ground are smaller. The same principle applies to the people on the ground when they see us." Zhang Feng smiled. He wondered if these guys were uneducated. They didn't even understand such simple principles. Oh, Du Go nodded as if he understood. "So that's how it is. You understand?" Cheng Chumo looked at Du Go with an evil smile. "I understand. Isn't it because the things in the distance are smaller?" Du Go's face was full of pride. It was as if he was talking about something very normal. But what he didn't see was that Cheng Chumo and Zhang Sun had already come over with their fists raised. They were staring at him with dissatisfaction. "I'll let you understand. You stinking brat, how dare you act cool in front of me? I'll beat you to death. You made me look bad." Du Go was caught off guard by the sudden punch and received it fiercely. The three of them wrestled together. However, fighting was also a daily routine for these fellows. If they didn't fight a few times a day, they would feel uncomfortable all over. Therefore, Zhang Feng didn't mind and happily watched from the side. He even clapped his hands and cheered. Chapter 1833. At the same time, in Chang'an City. At this time, it was the busiest time in Chang'an City. The streets and alleys were filled with the sound of merchants soliciting customers. Manservants shuttled through the crowd. Peddlers walked and stopped with goods on their shoulders. Couples of men and women were choosing goods on the shelves. The whole of Chang'an was bustling with people coming and going. It was very lively. Zhu Zi was still hawking on the street with the fermented glutinous rice as usual. Fermented glutinous rice, fermented glutinous rice. Just then, a roar came from behind. "Zhu Zi." "Oh, it's Hu Zi." Zhu Zi stopped and glanced behind him. Hu Zi held the load on his shoulder and quickly stepped forward to walk side by side with Zhu Zi. "Zhu Zi, how's the business today?" "How else could it be? It's the same as usual." Zhu Zi smiled and patted the jar with his left hand. There was a hollow sound. "Looks like you're doing well today." Hu Zi glanced at the jar and smiled. "Do you want to take a break?" "Okay." Zhu Zi agreed without hesitation. Then he glanced at the corner and said, "Let's go there to rest." After that, he walked to the corner with the load on his shoulder. Leaning against the corner, he put down the load. Hu Zi followed him closely. The two sat on the ground like this. Hu Zi wiped the sweat on his forehead and said with a smile, "Zhu Zi, where's your fermented glutinous rice? Take it out and I'll exchange it with a steamed bun." After that, he lifted his clothes and fanned himself casually. His eyes drifted around and the sky from time to time. Suddenly, he seemed to find something. His eyes widened. He couldn't believe it, but he didn't know what it was. He just kept pointing at it with his finger. "Hu Zi, here's your fermented glutinous rice." Zhu Zi handed over the fermented glutinous rice, only to find that Hu Zi was pointing at the sky. His eyes widened and his mouth kept muttering something. Hu Zi, what's wrong with you?" Zhu Zi shook Hu Zi and asked with concern. "What is that?" Hu Zi was still pointing at the sky. His body was trembling and he couldn't speak clearly. Zhu Zi curiously glanced in the direction of Hu Zi's finger. If he didn't look, he wouldn't have known. But when he looked, he was shocked. His pupils shrank and his body trembled. Could it be an immortal? After saying that, he seemed to have thought of something. He hurriedly shook Hu Zi and shouted, "Hu Zi, quickly put down your hand. You can't point. This is an immortal. If you continue to point, you will be punished by the heavens." Hu Zi, who was originally immersed in it, was suddenly awakened. He abruptly turned his head to look at the pillar, his body trembling. Yes. "Immortal, immortal." After saying that, he hurriedly knelt on the ground and began to kowtow while muttering, "Immortal, please forgive me. Immortal, please forgive me." When Zhu Zi saw this, he quickly followed Hu Zi's example and kowtowed on the ground. He even muttered the exact same words because in their knowledge, only immortals could go to heaven. In other words, no one could go to heaven now. Those who could go to heaven must be immortals. After a series of kowtows, The blood on their foreheads was clearly visible. Probably feeling tired, the two of them stood up together and ran in different directions. They even abandoned the burden of eating while muttering incantations. I have to go home and tell my mother that an immortal has appeared. An immortal has appeared. The two of them kept shuttling back and forth in the crowd as if they were under a spell. Soon, someone noticed this abnormality. At the same time, they also heard what they said and couldn't help but wonder, immortal? There are immortals there? While speaking, this person intentionally or unintentionally glanced at the sky. Perhaps due to the influence of traditional thinking, they believed that immortals must be in the sky. However, at this moment, he saw it. He saw what he thought was an immortal. Suddenly, his eyes widened. His brain seemed to have received an endless shock. He shouted crazily, "In the sky! There are immortals in the sky! There are immortals in the sky! Quickly look!" This roar instantly attracted the attention of the surrounding people. They glanced at this guy with some doubts. Immortals? How could it be? Lao Tzu had lived for decades and had never seen any immortals. Now you saw one? Most people held an attitude of disbelief. They thought that this guy was just crazy. Some people were even cursing in their hearts. However, there were still some curious people. They didn't believe in heresy. They couldn't help but shout in their hearts and look at the sky. Immortal? Is it really an immortal? Is that an immortal in the sky? Everyone quickly looked. There are immortals in the sky? In an instant, everyone around them roared. They widened their eyes and pointed at the sky. Their faces were full of surprise and disbelief. The roars became louder and louder and spread farther and farther. The streets and alleys of the entire Chang and city began to shout non-stop. Some people even knelt on the ground and began to worship. This was because in their education, the immortals were the representatives of the heavens. Now that an immortal had appeared, how could they not worship him? On the upper floor of Chang and city, the soldiers also noticed this phenomenon. They looked at the sky together, their faces full of horror. They were soldiers. Logically speaking, they should only be in awe of this ghost. It was hard for them to believe. However, when they glanced at the people kneeling on the ground, their faith began to waver. Chapter 1834. What's going on? What's going on? Is there really an immortal in the sky? Shut up. How can we talk about this kind of thing? There was a lot of discussion. They even left their posts and gathered together to look at the sky. Surprise, uneasiness, and disbelief all shrouded them. What are you doing? A guard with a Tang sword at his waist strode out with a solemn face. He was followed by a team of 10 people, each holding a 3-edged bayonet and killing decisively. The guard's name was Shi Lian, the general of Chang and city. He was resting in the city when someone reported that an unknown object had appeared in the sky. He specially came to check it out. It turned out that these people had gathered together to watch the fun. General, something happened in the sky. Seeing his superior coming, a guard quickly stepped forward, bowed, and pointed to the sky. Shi Lian frowned and glanced at the sky in the direction of the guard's finger. In an instant, he felt uneasy. What the hell is this? An immortal? His right hand, which was holding his saber, suddenly trembled. Fortunately, he was a military general, and he quickly restrained himself. He glanced at the sky unwillingly. It was still the same feeling. It was unbelievable. There was actually something flying in the sky? He tried hard to suppress the horror in his heart. Holding the Tang sword tightly in his right hand, he asked in a trembling voice, "What is this?" Based on his soldier's intuition, the thing in the sky was definitely not simple. However, it was not necessarily an immortal because he could not believe it. "General, I don't know." However, the people in Chang and city all said that it was an immortal. The guard lowered his body even more because the rumor came from Chang and city. As the general of Chang and city, he would be implicated if there was any problem. What? Shi Lian's pupils shrank. He pushed away the guard in front of him and walked quickly to the edge of the city wall. He saw groups of people shouting on Chang'an Street. Many people were pointing at the unknown object in the sky. Some had even knelt on the ground and kept praying. They were also calling for safety and an official career. Hurry up and comfort the people in Chang'an City. Try not to cause a disturbance." He raised his trembling right hand and pointed at the people on the ground, the muscles on his face twitching. This was Chang'an City. So many people were discussing and even kneeling down. If something happened, how was he going to explain it to his superiors? More importantly, this matter was related to immortals. If His Majesty the Emperor knew that so many people were kneeling down to an unknown object in the sky, he would be done for. "Yes, General." Everyone bowed in unison. All the guards did not dare to continue watching. They rushed down with Tang swords in their hands. They knew the severity of the matter. If more and more people gathered, it would be easy for people to die. In that case, it would be difficult for them to absolve themselves from the blame. Moreover, they only had respect for ghosts and gods. They did not believe in them or not. Bang, bang, bang. Sounds of footsteps could be heard coming from Chang'an City. The guards were lined up in a square formation with triangular bayonets in their hands. They looked at the crazy people in front of them with a serious face. A young man holding a Tang saber walked out from the group. "Everyone listen up. Don't stay on the street. Go home immediately." The one who spoke was Sang Feng, the deputy general of Zhilian. He held a Tang saber in his hand and looked at the people in front of him with a serious face. It seemed that he would start a fight if there was a disagreement. However, his words did not have any effect. The people were still standing in the same place and discussing. Some of them were kneeling down as if they did not see him. "Everyone listen up. Don't stay on the street. Go home immediately." Sang Feng was a little angry. He repeated it again. He decided that if the people did not go home, he would be ready to take coercive measures. The effect was minimal. The people did not pay attention to his words at all. It was as if they had gone crazy. The number of people kneeling down even rose sharply. "Men, get ready to force your way in." Sang Feng raised his right hand and gave the order. "Don't hurt the people. Just drive them home." "Yes," the people behind him answered in unison. Then, they put the triangular bayonets in their hands on their waists and rushed out. "What are you doing? Stop it. Why are you stopping me from kneeling down to the immortal?" The attack of the crowd immediately caused a fierce response from the people. They used their bodies as shields and started to resist the soldiers. Due to the large number of people, the soldiers were actually at a disadvantage. In addition, without orders, they did not dare to harm the people. Gradually, the situation began to deteriorate. On the city tower, Zhilian looked at all this. He clenched his right fist and cold sweat flowed down his forehead. He had a bad feeling. The people were gathering and kowtowing on the ground. If this went on for too long, it would definitely cause a mutiny. It seemed that he had to inform the High Duke. Thinking of this, he slammed his palm on the brick. He glanced at the people and soldiers in the chaotic battle unwillingly and left with a flick of his sleeves. "Prepare the horse. Let's go to High Duke Lu's residence." With that, he quickly walked down the city tower. The horse downstairs was already prepared. Zhilian jumped on the horse and rushed to High Duke Lu's residence. Chapter 1835. "Get out of the way! Get out of the way!" He glared and roared at the front while waving the horsewhip in his hand. Although the crowd was in a frenzy, they were not unafraid of death. Seeing the horse galloping, they knew he was not someone to be trifled with, so they made way for him. 30 minutes later, Si Lian arrived at High Duke Lu's residence. "Quick, report to High Duke Lu that something big has happened." Si Lian roared at the servant at the door before he even got off his horse. In his opinion, this matter had already reached a point where it could not be delayed. The servant's expression changed. He knew something must have happened, so he rushed into the residence. Whoosh! Si Lian reined in the horse, dismounted, and jumped into the Cheng residence. Just as he entered the door, he heard an unhappy roar. "Is it that bastard? How dare he disturb Lao Tzu for no reason?" The voice belonged to Qing Yaojin. He strode to the door and bumped into Si Lian. He frowned and said, "It's you, little bastard. Why are you here instead of guarding the gate of Chang'an City?" "Something big has happened, High Duke." Si Lian panted heavily as he looked at Qing Yaojin with a serious expression. "Damn it, what big thing can it be?" Could it be that the sky has collapsed? Cheng Yaojin was dissatisfied. He was practicing martial arts at home but was disturbed by this brat. How could he not be angry? Hi Duke, please calm down first. Si Lian swallowed and tried to moisten his dry throat. He grabbed Cheng Yaojin's left hand and pointed to the sky. Hi Duke, look at the sky. What is that? The sky. Cheng Yaojin frowned and was puzzled. What are you up to now? Although his mouth was unforgiving, he knew that Si Lian wouldn't dare to lie to him. Perhaps there really was something up in the sky. He still glanced at the sky, and this glance instantly made him feel unwell. But what is this? Cheng Yaojin raised his right hand and stared at the sky. Duke, I don't know either. Si Lian pulled a long face and said helplessly, Now, the people in Chang'an City are all saying that the thing in the sky is a deity. They are all kneeling and praying to it. What did you say? Cheng Yaojin's strong body suddenly trembled, and he slapped him backhandedly. He glared at him and said, Why don't you stop the people of Chang'an City from worshipping this thing? He had spent his entire life on the battlefield and didn't believe in ghosts and gods. He also didn't allow his subordinates to believe in such things. Today, Si Lian actually did something like this? Duke, you can't blame me for this. Si Lian touched his burning cheeks and felt a little wronged. You know that I'm your soldier and I never believe in these things. But the people of Chang'an City don't listen. They keep talking about it on Chang'an Avenue. Some of them have even knelt down to worship you. Then what are you waiting for? Take my waist token and borrow soldiers from the big hay. Cheng Yaojin looked as if he expected better from Si Lian. He took out a waist token from his waist and threw it to Si Lian. Go and find the big hay immediately. I have to go to the palace to discuss this with His Majesty. After that, he didn't wait for Si Lian to reply and directly walked to the door. He said while walking, Cheng Yi, prepare a horse to go to the palace. When he arrived at the door, the horse was already prepared. Cheng Yaojin jumped on the horse and rode with the long whip in his hand. He was heading to the palace. Get out of the way. Get out of the way for Lao Tzu. He kept waving the long whip in his hand to drive away the people who blocked his way. The people were originally people who bullied the kind and feared the evil. When they saw this guy who looked like a bandit, they all made way. In the time it took to burn a stick of incense, Cheng Yaojin arrived at the palace. Whoosh! Cheng Yaojin pulled the reins of the horse, jumped off, and rushed to the palace. Hi Duke, what are you doing? The guard went up and stopped Cheng Yaojin without saying anything. If it was someone else who barged into the palace, they might have been decapitated. However, it was the High Duke, so he could only treat him with respect. Get out of the way. I have something important to discuss with His Majesty. Cheng Yaojin didn't talk nonsense with the guard and directly rushed to the palace. Hi Duke, please don't make things difficult for me. The guard's expression was ugly. Guarding the palace gate was his responsibility. He didn't dare to let Cheng Yaojin in. At the very least, there had to be an announcement. Get out of the way. Cheng Yaojin slapped the guard's face with dissatisfaction. The guard immediately fell down and staggered twice. He didn't dare to say anything. Cheng Yaojin snorted coldly and walked to the palace gate. The other guards naturally didn't dare to stop him. They all knew how powerful Cheng Yaojin was. Moreover, he seemed to be especially angry today. He had just taught a guard a lesson. How could they dare to stop him? He took large strides to the imperial study. Along the way, he didn't dare to slack off at all. Hi Duke Lu, where are you going? The sound of a male duck came from behind. Cheng Yaojin glanced behind him. The one who spoke was Xiao Gizi. Xiao Gizi, why are you here? Where is His Majesty? Cheng Yaojin stopped and asked with a serious face. Hi Duke, His Majesty is in the imperial study. Xiao Gizi bowed and used the sound of a male duck. Okay, lead the way. I want to see His Majesty immediately. Chapter 1836. Cheng Yaojin grabbed little Gizi and rushed to the imperial study. He could not wait any longer. Duke, slow down, slow down. Little Gizi was trembling as he was being pulled, but he could not refuse the Duke's good intentions. He felt uncomfortable all over. Slow down? Hurry up. Cheng Yaojin did not care about this. He carried little Gizi and did not slow down. Now that they were in the palace and he was the one who broke into the palace, it was much easier to move around with this guy. Sure enough, with little Gizi, many patrolling guards did not come forward to ask questions. They were unimpeded all the way. Soon, the two of them arrived at the imperial study. Little Gizi was a little out of breath. "Duke, you can go in by yourself." Cheng Yaojin did not say anything and strode directly into the imperial study. He saw Li Shimin leaning over the desk and reading memorials. He had a cigarette in his left hand and took a puff from time to time. He looked very comfortable. "Your Majesty, something big has happened." Cheng Yaojin quickly stepped forward and bowed. Li Shimin, who was reading memorials, suddenly raised his head and glanced at Cheng Yaojin. He was a little confused. Why was this guy here? He did not summon him, but this was not important. He did not care and said seriously, "Why are you here?" "Your Majesty, something big has happened in Chang." An unidentified flying object appeared in the sky above Chang and city. Now the people regard this object as a god and have even started to worship it. Cheng Yaojin looked anxious and began to pace on the spot. "What?" Li Shimin threw down the brush in his hand and his eyes widened. "What is this unidentified flying object you are talking about?" "Your Majesty, I don't know either." Cheng Yaojin spread his hands and said helplessly, "I just took a look. I don't know what it is exactly." "Is the thing you are talking about still in the sky?" Li Shimin quickly walked down from the desk and looked at Cheng Yaojin with a serious face. "They should still be in the sky. I saw them on my way here." Cheng Yaojin glanced at the beam and his expression turned ugly. "Then what are you waiting for? Come with me and take a look." Li Shimin hurriedly finished and strode out of the door. From time to time, he would take 2 puffs of the cigarette in his hand. He seemed a little anxious. His steps were very big. In a moment he arrived at the door. When he looked up, his pupils instantly shrank. He could not help but be stunned in place. For a moment he did not know what to say. What was that in the sky? How could something fly in the sky? This was impossible. How could such an absurd thing happen? However, such a reality was happening right in front of his eyes. Could it really be, as Cheng Yaojin said, that he was an immortal? No, impossible. He had been fighting for several years and killed countless people, but he had never seen any immortals. Even demons and ghosts had to retreat. How could it be possible today? Not an immortal? Could it be a human? Was that guy playing tricks in the sky? It should be known that kites could also fly in the sky. It was not impossible for someone to make some huge kites to fly in the sky. However, this statement was soon overturned by him because no known kites could fly so high, let alone such a big one. It was completely impossible. Then what could it be? Could it be that God was dissatisfied with the Tang dynasty? Or was there any revelation? Thousands of thoughts were constantly breeding in his mind, but he just could not figure it out. At this time, a tingling pain came from between his fingers, which awakened him from his endless thoughts. He looked down and saw that the cigarette was about to burn out. He frowned and seemed to think of something. He quickly said to Xiao Gizi, "Quickly summon Imperial Astronomer Xu Jindo, Yuan Tiangang, Wei Zheng, Zhang Sun Wuji, Fang Xianling, Du Ruhui, and others to come to the palace to see me immediately." "Yes, Your Majesty." Xiao Gizi bowed and quickly turned to leave. As the emperor's personal eunuch, he naturally knew the importance of this matter. The appearance of an unknown object in the sky was a major event in the Tang dynasty. He did not dare to neglect it. Thinking of this, he walked faster, lowered his head tightly, and ignored the many things in front of him. A solid object hit him head-on, which made Xiao Gizi feel a little pain. He bared his teeth and was about to curse, but when he looked up, he was surprised. It was none other than Imperial Astronomer Xu Jindo, who was appointed by His Majesty. "Lord Xu, you came at the right time. His Majesty is summoning you. Come with me to see him." While speaking, Xiao Gizi also glanced behind Xu Jindo and found that Du Ruhui, Fang Xianling, and others were also there. He was so happy that he kept saluting. It turns out that Mr. Du and Lord Fang are also here. "His Majesty is summoning you. Hurry up and see him. His Majesty can't wait." Good. Eunuch, please lead the way." Shu Jindo did not dawdle and walked straight to the imperial study. He did not know why His Majesty summoned him in such a hurry, but he had something important to report to His Majesty. Generally speaking, the armillary sky supervisor did not enter the palace except to observe the astronomical phenomena and calculate the solar terms. But today he found an extremely strange thing. An unknown flying object actually appeared in the sky? This was very rare in the history of dynasties. Even if it did, it was a sign that the country was going to change. But today, such a thing actually happened in the Tang dynasty. This made his whole heart hang in the air, and he did not dare to let it go. Chapter 1837. Of course, he was not the only one with this idea. Yuan Tiangang and Li Chunfeng were also the first to discover this matter. They found Shu Jindo immediately. The three of them calculated together, but none of them made sense, so they decided to go to the palace together. On the way, they met Du Ruhui, Fang Xianling and others, so they went to the palace together. Although they were old, they did not slow down. In less than a moment, they arrived in front of Li Shimin. "Your Majesty, your humble servant." Everyone bowed in unison, but their faces were gloomy. In their eyes, they were also the backbone of the Tang dynasty. They should be loyal to the emperor. But today, they failed to see through the mystery in the sky. It was really a shame. "You don't have to be so courteous," Li Shimin replied casually. Then he pointed to the sky and frowned. "Dear ministers, please look. What is this thing in the sky? Do you know?" "Your Majesty, please stop." Shu Jindo hurriedly stepped forward and grabbed Li Shimin's right hand. His face was a little ugly. "Your Majesty, now it is said that the thing in the sky is an immortal. I'm afraid that such behavior will be disrespectful to immortals." "Immortals?" Li Shimin was a little unhappy. He did not believe in these things. At most, he was in awe. But this guy said the same thing. He really did not know how to talk. "Do you think it is an immortal?" "Well?" Shu Jindo glanced at the unknown object in the sky and did not know how to answer. If he did not believe it, he was a person who observed the astronomical phenomena and calculated the solar terms. He was still a little sensitive to these unpredictable things. If he believed it, His Majesty seemed to be a little dissatisfied. This was difficult for him. "Your Majesty, I don't think we should come to a conclusion so early." Wei Jing stepped forward, stroked his beard, and said seriously, "Oh." Li Shimin looked at Wei Jing and asked in confusion, "Why do you say that?" He was more optimistic about Wei Jing, not because the latter often advised him or was loyal, but because he could often find the key to the problem and hit the nail on the head. "Your Majesty." Wei Jing bowed and glanced at the sky. Then, he said seriously, "Your Majesty, I don't think it's urgent to figure out what the thing in the sky is, but to appease the people first. The people are ignorant. If such a thing appears, they will definitely regard it as a divine object and rush to worship it. On my way here, I saw that Chang and city was in chaos. Countless people were kneeling on the ground, calling it an immortal and worshipping it wantonly. If this goes on, I'm afraid it will cause a commotion or even a mutiny." He deliberately emphasized the word mutiny and glanced at Qing Yaojin while speaking. Because the Chang and city gate was under the control of Qing Yaojin's subordinates, now that something had happened, Qing Yaojin could not get away with it. Qing Yaojin seemed to have felt the cold gaze as well. His old face darkened, and he immediately jumped out. "Wei Jing, who are you scolding in a roundabout way? If you have the guts, let's go to the martial arts practice field to practice. Don't stab Lao Tzu in the back." "Jijia," Li Shimin shouted and stared at Qing Yaojin with a pair of tiger-like eyes. "What are you doing? This is the palace, not your home. You are not allowed to make trouble here." "Your Majesty, please forgive me." Qing Yaojin quickly stepped back and pointed at Wei Jing with a fierce face. "It's this old." Halfway through his words, he saw that Li Shimin's eyes were a little dissatisfied. He cupped his hands repeatedly. He was not afraid of anything, but he was afraid of Li Shimin. "Stop talking. Let me ask you, what's the situation in Chang and city?" Li Shimin waved his hand, as if he did not want to listen to Qing Yaojin's explanation. Instead, he directly asked about the situation in Chang and city. Your Majesty, this? Xianxia cupped his hands, and his face was a little ugly. What is this? I want to hear the current situation in Chang and city from you. Li Shimin stared at Xianxia and said sternly. Chang and city was the heart of the Tang dynasty and the lifeline of the world. It was the place he cared about the most. If it were not for Wei Zheng's advice, he would not have known the situation until now. This guy was still unwilling to talk about it? Your Majesty, when the unidentified object appeared earlier, there was indeed a commotion in Chang and city. Fortunately, I have stopped it. Cheng Yaojin bowed and said in a trembling voice. I'm afraid not. Wei Zheng looked at him coldly and said with cupped hands, Your Majesty, as far as I know, there is a commotion in Chang and city now. The guards guarding the city can't stop it. There are signs of people passing on. After that, he waved his sleeve and coldly glanced at Cheng Yaojin. Of course, he did not deliberately target Cheng Yaojin. He just felt that when such a big thing happened, how could Cheng Yaojin, a duke, stop it? Instead, he made things worse. He was really ashamed to face His Majesty and the Tang dynasty. Wei Zheng, don't talk nonsense here. Who said I didn't stop it? Cheng Yaojin stared and pointed at Wei Zheng, very dissatisfied. Cheng Yaojin, shut up. Li Shimin did not shout Jijia this time. He was really angry. He took a long breath and said coldly, Did you stop the commotion in Chang and city or not? Chapter 1838. Your Majesty. Cheng Yaojin glared at Wei Zheng and then slowly looked away. I have informed Big He on my way here. He has led the army to Chang and city to suppress the people. I believe that in less than half an hour, there will be immediate results. Hearing this, Li Shimin's frowning brows relaxed. He knew Yu Qigong's ability very well. He had always been famous for his bravery and fighting. Since he followed him to lead the army, he rarely lost. It should be no problem for him to suppress some people. Since Jingda has already rushed to Chang and city, I believe there will be no problem. Now, let's talk about the matter at hand. What is the thing in the sky? He glanced at the crowd, and his face was full of worry. To be honest, he really didn't want to believe that the thing in the sky was the manifestation of immortals. However, all the signs made him have to believe it. It was really a little worrying. Your Majesty. Fang Xianling stepped forward with his hands folded. He glanced at the thing in the sky and said slowly, Your Majesty, Shu Jindo, Master Yuan, and Master Li of the Imperial Astronomer are all here. Why don't you let them do a divination to find out the mysteries of heaven? Yes, how could I forget these three? Li Shimin's face showed a trace of joy. Then, he glanced at the three people who stood out among the crowd. Why did they stand out among the crowd? It was because they were all wearing Taoist robes. There was a faint temperament of Taoist masters emerging. The three of you, please do a divination for the Tang dynasty. What is the thing in the sky? In fact, they had already done a divination before coming to the palace. They had even asked Shu Jindo of the Imperial Astronomer to do a divination together. The three of them did a divination together, but they didn't find any mysteries of heaven or anything. That was why they came to the palace to discuss with His Majesty. However, as soon as they came, they were temporarily delayed because of the matter in Chang and city. During this period, he secretly did a divination in his sleeve, but he didn't find anything. Now, His Majesty asked him to do a divination. This, if he couldn't find out the thing in the sky, wouldn't he ruin his reputation? And he would be guilty of deceiving the emperor? However, he couldn't refuse the emperor's request. Otherwise, it would be a crime of disobedience. It seemed that he had no choice but to bite the bullet. Thinking of this, he formed a seal with his right hand and bowed. Yes, Your Majesty. However, you must prepare incense tables, candlesticks, and other sacrificial items. These are all trivial matters. Taoist priest, please do it quickly. Li Shimin readily agreed. Then he looked at little Gizi who was on standby. Little Gizi, immediately send someone to prepare the incense table and candlesticks. It must be quick. Yes, Your Majesty. Little Gizi bowed and turned to leave. In less than a quarter of an hour, Shao Gizi leisurely walked over with a few eunuchs, holding incense, candles, yellow paper, and other sacrificial items. The imperial palace often held sacrificial ceremonies, so these things were necessary and not difficult to find. The incense table was neatly arranged under Xiao Gizi's direction, and the candlesticks and yellow paper were also neatly arranged. The three of you, can we begin now? Li Shimin glanced at Yuan Tiangang and others and asked eagerly. Yuan Tiangang didn't answer. Instead, he looked up at the unidentified flying object in the sky. After about 2 or 3 seconds, he frowned and said, "Your Majesty, we can begin." After that, he turned to look at Li Chunfeng and others behind him and said helplessly, "Chunfeng, Jindo, let's do the divination together." The two nodded and didn't speak because they knew that it was useless to say anything now. Only the divination would know the truth. Although there was no result just now, they might be able to get a glimpse now. With such a lucky thought, the three of them walked to the incense table with seals in their hands. Yuan Tiangang stood in the middle, picked up the wooden sword on the incense table, and stood in front of him. Then, he formed a seal with his left hand and glanced at the two people on his left and right. Chunfeng Jindo raised the sword. "Let's start together." The two of them understood, so they didn't need to say anything. They nodded and grabbed the wooden sword. After looking at each other, the three of them closed their eyes and began to chant. Wearing a canopy on the head, walking on Kuegong, supporting Liujia on the left, Luding Luding on the right, Luding Luding on the front, Luding Luding on the back. As soon as the voice fell, the three of them opened their eyes. At this moment, their eyes seemed to emit a light that couldn't be seen clearly or touched. Then, they began to wave the wooden sword in their hands. First, it was up and then down. It seemed to be disorderly, but in fact, it contained the universe. The 9 luminaries move forward, the beginning of the origin lingers, the essence of the flower responds to the brightness, the original spirit scatters, the endless flow of hope descends upon me, the glory of Zhu Jing, the stagnation is lifted, the red clouds rise, the purple star rises, all things in the world, let me be a prophet. The three of them put the seal in their left hands to the tip of their noses and urged the incantation with a serious face. At this moment, they seemed to have entered a state of selflessness. Everything around them had nothing to do with them. The people behind them looked at this scene and didn't feel surprised because it wasn't the first time they had seen it. Every time the royal family offered sacrifices, they would let the official office of the imperial astronomer do it. Sometimes, they would invite Yuan Tiangang, Li Chunfeng, and others. Chapter 1839. Although they were used to these things, they still had some repulsion in their hearts. Ghosts and gods were mysterious and unpredictable. How could they be seen through so simply by reciting a few spells? Especially Qing Yaojin, he was even more disgusted with these things. He even put his hands up and was ready to watch a good show. He was a soldier and had killed more people than the people of Chang'an City. If there were really ghosts and gods, why didn't they come to take his life? Of course, he only belonged to the kind of people who didn't believe in ghosts and gods, but he didn't dare to be disrespectful to ghosts and gods because there had been sacrificial activities since ancient times. These acts of praying for people's blessings were originally good intentions. They could not believe in them, but they could not be destroyed. Otherwise, they would become the public enemy of the entire Tang dynasty, which was not something a duke could bear. Li Shimin didn't know these different thoughts of the people. At this time, he clenched his fists and opened his eyes wide. It seemed that he wanted to see something from such a ceremony, but unfortunately, he saw nothing. In fact, he also belonged to the kind of people who didn't believe in ghosts and gods. What immortals? If these immortals really exist, why did the people of the Tang dynasty suffer so much? Thinking of the Turks who killed the people of the Tang dynasty for fun a few years ago, he was full of doubts about the immortals. However, he was not only Li Shimin, but also the emperor of the Tang dynasty. When such a strange thing appeared, people couldn't go to heaven to check it. They could only hope for ghosts and gods, so they invited Yuan Tiangang and others. Otherwise, how could they know the truth? There was no other way. Only by figuring out what it was could he give the people an answer and appease the restless people. Otherwise, how could he face the people of the Tang dynasty in the future? Thinking of this, Li Shimin's face showed the sadness again. He subconsciously took out a cigarette from his waist and stretched out his slightly trembling right hand to touch the fire roll, but he didn't feel anything. At this time, Xiao Gizi hurriedly took out a match from his waist and handed it over respectfully. He was His Majesty's personal eunuch, so it was necessary for him to have sharp eyes. Ever since he knew His Majesty liked this, the match at his waist had never been broken. Li Shimin glanced at little Gizi out of the corner of his eye and nodded slightly. He stretched out the cigarette, lit it slowly, and took a deep breath. This relieved his tight nerves. After relaxing for a while, he turned his eyes again to Yuan Tiangang and others who were doing the ritual. Yuan Tiangang and the other two had adjusted the posture of the wooden swords in their hands, but they still kept chanting. Heaven and earth are natural, the filthy air is dispersed, the mysterious void in the cave, the dazzling Taiwan, the mighty gods from all directions, make me natural, the talisman of Lingbao, announced to the 9 heavens. As soon as he finished speaking, he glanced at Li Chunfeng and Xu Jindo and said solemnly, "Take them." The 3 of them took a long breath and put the long swords on the incense table. Yuan Tiangang took out 3 copper coins from his sleeve and threw them on the incense table. He put his palms together and murmured. After a quarter of an hour, he slowly opened his eyes and looked at the copper wire. How could this be? Yuan Tiangong's pupils shrank, and his brows were almost knitted together. Li Chunfeng and Xu Jindo were the same. They were in disbelief, as if this divination wasn't done by them. The 3 of you, what happened? Li Shimin noticed the abnormality and quickly stepped forward. He glanced at the copper coins on the incense table, but he couldn't understand them at all. He had to look at Li Chunfeng and others and asked, "Taoist, how do you explain this divination?" No one answered. The 3 of them stared at the copper coins as if they didn't hear Li Shimin. They weren't pretending not to hear him, nor were they purposely not answering. It was because of this divination. This divination was really strange. Usually, no matter what happened, Yuan Tiangang was alone. Even if he didn't know everything, he could still get a glimpse of the big picture. There was also Li Chunfeng, whose cultivation was not lower than Yuan Tiangong's. The 2 of them were teachers and friends. When they worked together, there had never been a divination that they couldn't solve, let alone the half-baked Xu Jindo. However, when the 3 of them worked together today, the divination couldn't be solved. There was no reason for it. It was as if the things in the sky came out of nowhere and had nothing to do with ghosts or gods. Strange, very strange. Li Chunfeng frowned. At this moment, he wasn't in the mood to study whether there was a problem with his Taoist technique. He was focused on this divination. "Taoist Li, why do you say so?" Li Shimin saw that Li Chunfeng was the only one who spoke, so he had to ask this unlucky guy. "Your Majesty, there's something you don't know." Li Chunfeng glanced at Li Shimin and didn't salute. Maybe it was because he only thought of him as a beggar, or maybe it was because he was so immersed in the divination that he had completely forgotten. "Your Majesty, in the past, Tiangang and I have always divined things clearly. Today, with Brother Jindo, there should be no problem. However, there was a mistake. Not only did we fail to divine what is in the sky, but we also failed to divine the cause. This is really strange." As he spoke, he intentionally or unintentionally glanced at the object in the sky, and his eyes were filled with curiosity and bewilderment. He thought to himself, "If I know what it is, I'll definitely study it for 7 days and 7 nights before I stop." Chapter 1840. However, he didn't see Li Shimin's lonely eyes. It seemed that the hope in his heart had been shattered. How could this be? Li Shimin's hands trembled a little. He glanced at the 3 people and said, "Even the 3 of you can't figure out what this is? Then who else in the Tang dynasty can know?" "Your Majesty, don't panic." Yuan Tiangang hurriedly stepped forward and held Li Shimin. "Your Majesty, although we didn't figure out what this is, we feel that it is an ominous sign." "What do you mean?" Zhang Sun Wuji stepped forward and took Yuan Tiangong's right hand. He was a little surprised. At the emperor's side, he could be said to be the most loyal subordinate because the current empress was his sister, and the emperor was his brother-in-law. Zhang Sun Wuji's family had invested in the Tang dynasty. Now Yuan Tiangang suddenly said that it was an ominous sign. Didn't that mean that the Tang dynasty would be in danger? How could his current uncle sit still? Not only him, but Cheng Yaojin, Wei Jing, Du Ruhui, Fang Xianling, and others also stepped forward quickly. Their average age was not young, and their steps were a little staggered, but this could not stop their determination to worry about the country and the people. Especially Cheng Yaojin, his eyes were wide open. He couldn't believe it because he knew that the current emperor had a good emperor who worried about the country and the people. He had deeply understood this since he followed Li Shimin. He had gone through fire and water with the soldiers, ate and slept with them. How could such an emperor have any ominous sign? There was also Wei Zheng. He also couldn't believe it. Although His Majesty was sometimes lazy, violent, and ruthless, His Majesty was a qualified monarch because he handled political affairs conscientiously every day. How could there be an ominous sign? This was really a little ridiculous. Li Shimin naturally noticed the nervous expressions on the faces of the officials. He was very gratified that he was able to receive the support of everyone. He did not waste his time as the ruler. But what was this ominous sign? He thought of the change in the Xuanwu Gate. Could it be that Yuan Tiangong's words were true? Even the heavens were dissatisfied and wanted to punish him with misfortune? If that was the case, he hoped that God would not punish the people of the Tang dynasty. After praying in his heart, he turned his eyes to Yuan Tiangong again, but his heart was in a mess. Taoist Yuan, please continue. Li Shimin's face was a little pale, and only his trembling hands showed his inner fear. Yes, Your Majesty. Yuan Tiangong cupped his hands and said slowly under everyone's complicated gaze, do you still remember the Pre-Qin bewilderment stone? What? Wei Zheng's eyes widened, his hands trembling as he shot a glance at the object in the sky. You mean to say that the object in the sky is Mars? As soon as he finished speaking, there was an uproar among the officials. What? It's Mars? How could it be? The three words Mars stone were like a stone thrown into a calm water surface, instantly causing countless ripples. Most of the people present were Confucian scholars. They were familiar with history and deeply knew what the three words Mars represented. It was a star of misfortune. Mars was known as Mars due to its fiery glow and unpredictable whereabouts. It was also known as the Crimson Star, the Punishment Star, and the Law Enforcement Star. Throughout history, whenever Mars appeared, there would be endless disasters and countless casualties. The earliest record was in the Spring and Autumn period and the Warring States period. King Hui of Chu destroyed the Qin dynasty, which was said to have a great relationship with Mars. Later, when Ying unified the 6 states, Mars fell on the East County and was engraved with 6 words. The first emperor died and the land was divided, causing countless innocent people in the East County to suffer. At the end of the Western Han dynasty, someone reported to the Prime Minister of Emperor Cheng of Han that there was a celestial phenomenon of Mars guarding the heart, and the Prime Minister committed suicide. All kinds of signs showed that Mars was a star of misfortune and an ominous sign. Thinking of this, everyone shuddered and unconsciously trembled. They were all officials of the Tang dynasty and naturally did not want such a disaster to befall the Tang dynasty. Especially Li Shimin, who had killed countless people and carried countless sins. Today, Mars fell from the sky? Wasn't this a punishment from the heavens? Could it be that it was punishing the people of the Tang dynasty? He had killed countless people. How could he punish his own people? He was a little scared. Although he did not believe in these things, he could not help but believe what was in front of him. Taoist, are you sure this is Mars? Li Shimin's hands trembled and glanced at the thing in the sky from time to time. You can't be wrong about this, can you? Yes, Taoist, you can't be careless about this kind of thing. Taoist, Mars isn't just a joke. Taoist, why don't you do another divination? Everyone asked with a worried look. If Mars really appeared, they would also be victims. Now, they did not dare to be careless. Yuan Tiangong glanced at the nervous crowd and his hands were a little sweaty. Then, he looked at Li Shimin and said with a serious face, Your Majesty, I'm just guessing. May I ask, other than Mars, who can fly in the sky? Forgive me for my ignorance. As soon as he said this, the people who had a glimmer of hope were completely disappointed. Chapter 1841. Yes, apart from Mars, what else could fly in the sky? Immortals? But why had they never seen it before? This, They couldn't find an excuse to refute for a while, so they just looked at each other and kept silent. Taoist, even if this is Mars, do you have a way to break it? Or what will happen to this disaster? Li Shimin's face was drained of blood because he knew that wherever Mars landed, there would be calamity. This was an unchanging principle since time immemorial, and since there was no way to change it now, he could only minimize the damage. He looked at Yuan Tiangang with hope, but what he got in return was a bitter look. Yuan Tiangang shook his head and frowned. Your Majesty, everyone, it's not that I didn't try my best. If this is really Mars, even if my master comes, it won't help. What? It won't help? How could this be? With tears in their eyes, everyone looked at the thing in the sky unwillingly and shouted that the heaven was unfair. At this time, they really believed what Yuan Tiangang said, because they knew that there was nothing that could fly in the sky. If there really was, it had to be Mars, and the Tang Empire was about to usher in an unprecedented disaster. Everyone kept crying and complaining. Some people even sat on the stone platform, shouting that the people were innocent and the heaven was unfair. Even Li Shimin was leaning against a pillar, his eyes brimming with tears. He now truly suspected that it was he who had attracted Mars, that the heavens had sent down this divine retribution. But were the people of the great Tang guilty? Did they have to be implicated by him? He kept knocking on the pillar with grief in his heart. Just as he was immersed in his sorrow, a trembling figure walked up to him and spoke in a hoarse voice. Your Majesty, why don't you issue an edict of guilt? The one who spoke was Wei Zheng. As the head of all the officials, the only way he could think of right now was to have Li Shimin issue an edict. This was the most direct method, and it was also the method that had been frequently used in previous dynasties. Li Shimin slowly raised his head and glanced at Wei Zheng and the officials behind him. He was struggling in his heart. If he announced that he had committed a crime, would he not admit that he had done wrong? But what about Mars if he didn't? Were they really going to let Mars bring disaster upon them? The commoners were innocent. Forget it, this is the only way now. After struggling for a while, he finally made up his mind and waved his hand helplessly. Write the decree for me. Yes, Your Majesty. Wei Zheng seemed to have aged 10 years in an instant. He slowly walked towards the imperial study with his hunched body. Hold on. Just as Wei Zheng was about to step into the room, a loud shout was heard. Wei Zheng stopped in his tracks and turned around slowly. When he saw that it was Li Chunfeng, he couldn't help but ask, Taoist Li, why did you stop the old man? As soon as he finished speaking, everyone looked at Li Chunfeng in confusion. Now that it was confirmed that it was Mars, why did Li Chunfeng come out to cause trouble? Was he going to stop His Majesty from announcing that he had committed a crime? They couldn't understand Li Chunfeng's behavior, including Yuan Tiangang. He didn't know what was wrong with this guy who was both a teacher and a friend. He could only look at him curiously. Everyone listen to me first. Li Chunfeng cupped his hands at the crowd, then glanced at the sky and said with a serious face, In my opinion, it shouldn't be Mars in the sky. What? It's not Mars? Are you serious? The desolate eyes of the officials suddenly seemed to light up, and they strode forward, grabbing each other's arms and tugging at their robes in impatience. These words could change the fate of the great Tang, so they didn't dare to be careless. Li Shimin was the same. He strode forward like a tiger and stared with a serious face. Is what you said true? He didn't dare to be careless because he was the Tang Emperor's. If anything happened to him, thousands of people would die. Don't worry, everyone. Let go of me first. Li Chunfeng's face turned red. He must have been pushed by the crowd. Everyone let go of me first. Then I can speak frankly. Everyone, please stop. Li Shimin saw that the situation was not right and quickly stopped the crowd. Everyone back down. Otherwise, how can Taoist Li speak frankly? Everyone reluctantly let go of Li Chunfeng and took half a step back. They knew that Li Chunfeng wouldn't be able to say anything if they were to hold on to him like that. Even though they took a step back, their eyes were filled with anticipation. Taoist Li, can you speak frankly now? Li Shimin's face was gloomy and expressionless. He wasn't worried that Li Chunfeng would lie to him because he knew that Li Chunfeng was just a Taoist. He was worried that Li Chunfeng would give him hope and not disappoint him. Li Chunfeng didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at Yuan Tiangang beside him. Yuan Tiangang gave him a look that said nothing. Only then did Li Chunfeng feel relieved. He had overturned the conclusion of others. Naturally, he had to say hello to others. Moreover, this person was his good friend who was both a teacher and a friend. Chapter 1842. At the same time, in Chang'an City. At this time, it was the busiest time in Chang'an City. The streets and alleys were filled with the sound of merchants soliciting customers. Servants shuttled through the crowd. Peddlers were walking and stopping with goods on their shoulders. Pairs of men and women were choosing goods on the shelves. The whole city was bustling with people coming and going. It was very lively. Zhu Zi was still hawking on the street with the fermented glutinous rice as usual. Fermented glutinous rice, fermented glutinous rice. Just then, a roar came from behind. Zhu Zi. It's Hu Zi. Zhu Zi stopped and glanced behind him. Hu Zi held the load on his shoulder and quickly stepped forward to walk side by side with Zhu Zi. Zhu Zi, how's the business today? How can it be? It's the same as usual. Zhu Zi smiled and patted the jar with his left hand. There was a hollow sound. Looks like you're doing well today. Hu Zi glanced at the jar and smiled. Do you want to take a rest? Okay. Zhu Zi agreed without hesitation. Then, he glanced at the corner and said, let's go there to rest. After that, he walked to the corner with the load on his shoulder. Leaning against the corner, he put down the load. Hu Zi followed him closely. The two sat on the ground. Hu Zi wiped the sweat on his forehead and said with a smile, Zhu Zi, where's your fermented glutinous rice? Take it out and let me taste it. I'll exchange it with a steamed bun. After that, he lifted his clothes and fanned himself casually. His eyes drifted around and the sky from time to time. Suddenly, he seemed to find something. His eyes widened. He couldn't believe it, but he didn't know what it was. He just kept pointing at it with his fingers. Hu Zi, your fermented glutinous rice. Zhu Zi handed over the fermented glutinous rice, but found that Hu Zi was pointing at the sky. His eyes widened and his mouth kept muttering something. Hu Zi, what's wrong with you? Zhu Zi shook Hu Zi and asked with concern. What is that? Hu Zi was still pointing at the sky. His body was trembling and he couldn't speak clearly. Zhu Zi curiously glanced in the direction of Hu Zi's finger. He didn't know if he didn't look, but when he looked, he was shocked. His pupils instantly shrank and his body trembled. Could this be the legendary Bane? As soon as these words came out, Hu Zi quivered and instantly sobered up a lot. He grabbed the pillar and shouted, What Bane? Calamity Star. Zhu Zi trembled as he glanced at the sky. Then he looked at Hu Zi. His face was pale and his body trembled. I heard from the older generation that when something like this appears in the sky, it's a jinx. What? Hu Zi's face turned pale. He turned around to grab his load, but his trembling arms made him unable to exert any strength. As he grabbed the load, he muttered, The jinx is here. What should I do with my baby? He tried to grab it a few times, but he still couldn't lift it. In the end, he gave up and ran towards his house. As he ran, he shouted, The jinx is here. The jinx is here. When Zhu Zi heard this, he seemed to have thought of something and ran towards his house. He didn't even care about his load. As he ran, he shouted, Jinx, jinx. He deeply understood what a jinx meant. It was to bring disaster to the world. The older generation said that once a jinx descended, the world would be in chaos. People would eat people, foreign races would begin to invade, and such things would come with the jinx. The people who would suffer would be the common people. Then what would happen to his mother? What would happen to his baby? Thinking of this, he sped up and shuttled through the crowd. He kept shouting as if he was under a spell. Soon, someone noticed this abnormality. At the same time, they also heard what they were saying. They couldn't help but wonder, Jinx? Jinx? Perhaps it was due to the influence of traditional thinking, or perhaps it was because of curiosity. This person intentionally or unintentionally glanced at the sky. At this moment, he saw it. He saw the jinx that those people were talking about. Suddenly, his eyes widened. His brain seemed to have received an endless shock. He crazily shouted, In the sky, there's a jinx in the sky? Everyone look. This roar instantly attracted the attention of the people around. They glanced at this guy with some doubts. Jinx? How is that possible? Now is the time when the weather is good. The Tang dynasty is gradually flourishing. How can there be a jinx? Besides, Lao Tzu had lived for decades and had never seen a jinx. Now you've seen one? Most people held an attitude of disbelief. They thought that this guy was just crazy. Some people were even cursing him in their hearts. However, there were still some curious people. They didn't believe it. They couldn't help but shout in their hearts and look at the sky. Jinx, is it really a jinx? A jinx appeared in the sky. In an instant, everyone around shouted. They widened their eyes and pointed to the sky. Their faces were full of surprise and disbelief. The roars became louder and louder, spreading farther and farther. The streets and alleys of Chang and city began to shout non-stop. Chapter 1843. As the sound spread further and further, there was a commotion on the streets of Chang. The peddlers were not in the mood to sell their goods, and the manservants stopped shouting. They all looked up at the sky with fear, doubt, and disbelief written all over their faces. Because in their education, the jinx was a sign that a disaster was coming. If the Tang dynasty was going to be hit by a disaster, what should they do? They were just ordinary people. Did God want them to die? The defense line in their hearts began to collapse bit by bit. Fear took over their bodies and minds. Some people even knelt down and began to pray, hoping to pray for themselves and their families so that the jinx would show mercy. After the first person knelt down, the second, the third, and countless people began to kneel down. The streets of Chang and were filled with people kneeling down. They put their hands together and kept kowtowing on the ground. They were also chanting, hoping that the jinx would spare them and their families so that their families would suffer less. Soon, the streets of Chang and were covered with blood. On average, one could see people kneeling down with every step. Of course, not everyone knelt on the ground. Some people who cared about their families could not stay any longer and ran home. However, there were too many people kneeling down. For a moment, there were fights and mutinies. In less than a quarter of an hour, the streets of Chang and were filled with blood and flesh. Arms and legs were hanging on the side of the street. The scene was very frightening. This scene quickly attracted the attention of the soldiers stationed in Chang and city. They looked in the direction of the people's kowtowing to the sky. As a result, they saw something they had never seen before. To be precise, it was something they had never seen before in their lives. There was an unidentified flying object in the sky. Their faces were full of horror. The spears in their hands seemed to have lost their strength and slid to the ground. Their hands kept pointing at the sky. The muscles on their faces trembled. Shock and uneasiness shrouded them. Was it really like what the people said? The jinx had appeared in the sky? Was the jinx about to descend? Was the world going to be in chaos? All kinds of doubts surrounded the people like a haze that could not be dispersed. Logically speaking, they were all soldiers. They only had awe and even a little doubt in their hearts. However, based on the historical materials of the past and the various signs of the people today, this was really the jinx. It was going to kill people. Since the world was going to be in chaos? Then what was the point of being a soldier? Since they were going to die sooner or later, they might as well go home first. Moreover, the people had already rebelled. As the guards of Chang and city, they would definitely be punished. In that case, they might as well take care of their own business. At the thought of this, many soldiers began to run down the city tower. They didn't dare to wait any longer. They wanted to reunite with their families. Every moment of delay meant one less moment of reunion. Even if they were to die, they wanted to die together. Everyone was selfish. Humans are fearful of the unknown. Humans have emotions too. In the face of life and death, they would only worry about their loved ones. They were soldiers, but they were also human beings. They were not inferior to ordinary people. In fact, they valued these things more than ordinary people. After the first deserter, the second deserter soon followed. The gate of Chang and city was opened wide, and countless soldiers began to file out. Their destination was not the battlefield, but their hometown. More and more deserters began to run down the city tower. With the flow of people in and out, the city gate was congested. Countless people were trampled to death. There were also some deserters who saw that they couldn't get in or out of the city gate. They even chose to jump off the city wall. One could imagine the consequences of jumping off the city wall, which was more than 10 meters high. However, they didn't hesitate, and they didn't dare to hesitate, because once the star of calamity appeared, it would be more terrible than death. Just as everyone rushed down the city tower crazily, a guard general strode out with a Tang sword at his waist. His face was solemn, and he was followed by a team of 10 people. Each of them was holding a 3-edged bayonet and killed decisively. "What are you doing?" This guard general was called Su Lian. He was the guard general of Chang'an City. He was resting in the city when someone reported that an unknown object had appeared in the sky. He specially came to check it out, but he saw this tragic scene. Everyone looked up and saw that it was the general. As if they had seen their backbone, they stopped jumping off the building, but their bodies kept trembling. "General, the star of calamity has appeared in the sky." The people have gone crazy. Some people pointed at the people under the city wall, while others pointed at the unknown object in the sky. Their voices became more and more trembling. "Star of calamity?" Su Lian frowned and glanced at the sky in the direction of the guard general's fingers. In an instant he felt terrible. What the hell is this? Why is there something flying in the sky? This was not logical at all. Why would such a situation occur? Is it really like what everyone said? The star of calamity has appeared? The world will be in chaos? The world will be in chaos? Thinking of these words, his right hand that was holding the sword suddenly trembled, and he couldn't help but feel cold. If that's the case, then the Tang dynasty will be finished. The people will be finished. Right, they're also the people. Have the people gone crazy? Chapter 1844. He shuddered in an instant and strode toward the city wall. His body trembled violently at this glance. Then he felt his vision go black and his body fell backward unconsciously. "General! General, are you okay?" The 10-man squad behind him supported Si Lian with concern. They were Si Lian's personal guards and regarded the general's life as more important than their own. Si Lian, who was in a coma, was suddenly awakened by the violent impact. He glanced at the crowd, raised his trembling right hand, and shouted, "Quick, send people down to suppress them. We can't let the people cause a mutiny." Although he was terrified, he was a soldier of the Tang dynasty. This was an honor earned by his military exploits. How could he follow those deserters at this moment? That would be a waste of his finger that was chopped off on the battlefield. Moreover, if there was a mutiny in Chang, he would die, and so would the Bane. Why not choose a glorious way to die? These thoughts might work on him, but the soldiers on the city wall didn't buy it. They were just foot soldiers. Why should they suppress the people in such a situation? Wasn't that courting death? This was a calamity. Who could stop it? "General, you'd better let us go." "Yes, General. We can't suppress it at all." The crowd looked at Si Lian pleadingly. At this moment, they were still thinking about how to leave. However, the general's prestige had been deeply imprinted in their hearts. They didn't dare to leave without an order. Because even if they left, the general could find them. Deserters would be killed and even their wives and children would be implicated. They couldn't bear the consequences. What? Si Lian's eyes narrowed. He took out the Tang saber from his waist and looked at the crowd fiercely. He shouted, "Can't suppress it? Do you want to be deserters?" Desertion was a capital offense. As long as someone dared to say the word deserter, he would cut him down without hesitation. "General, everyone looked at Si Lian timidly. For a moment, they were speechless because they knew they were in the wrong. Desertion was not something to be proud of. It was a capital offense. Moreover, the general's prestige was deeply buried in their hearts. At this moment, they didn't dare to say anything. They were afraid that they would die if they said the wrong thing. Si Lian naturally understood what everyone was thinking. If he wasn't here, these guys would have fled long ago. However, once he showed up, he wouldn't allow any deserters. At the very least, such a situation couldn't happen within his jurisdiction. Since none of you are deserters, listen to my orders. Si Lian glanced at the crowd and raised his Tang saber up high. He shouted, "Go and suppress the people. Anyone who disobeys will be beheaded." "Yes, General," everyone replied unwillingly. They picked up the scattered spears on the ground and ran down the city gate, glancing into the distance from time to time. Hopefully, the lives of the brothers who escaped are not in danger. "Sai, what time is it now? How can I still have the time to care about others? I should take care of myself first." Bitter laughter, dissatisfaction, and ridicule accompanied the crowd as they surged toward the common people. Bang, 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 sounds of footsteps came from Chang'an City. The guards were all armed with spears and Mitsubishi bayonets at their waists. They lined up in a square formation and looked at the frenzied common people with complicated expressions. A young man holding a Tang saber walked out from the group. "Everyone listen up. Don't stay on the streets. Go home immediately." The one who spoke was Si Lian's deputy general, Sang Feng. He held his Tang saber and looked at the common people with a serious expression. He looked like he would start a fight at any moment. However, his words didn't have any effect. The common people were still standing on the spot and discussing. Some of them were kneeling down as if they didn't see him. "Everyone listen up. Don't stay on the streets. Go home immediately." Sang Feng was a little angry and repeated his words. He had decided that if the common people didn't go home, he would use force. The effect was minimal. The common people didn't pay attention to his words at all. It was as if they had gone crazy. The number of people kneeling down even increased. "Men, prepare to force your way in." Sang Feng raised his right hand and gave the order. "Don't hurt the common people. Just chase them home." "Yes." The people behind him responded in unison. Then, they put their Mitsubishi bayonets at their waists and rushed out. "What are you doing? Stop it. Why do you dare to let us go home?" The attack of the crowd instantly caused an intense response from the common people. They used their bodies as shields and resisted the soldiers. Due to the large number of common people, the soldiers were actually at a disadvantage. Furthermore, they didn't have orders and didn't dare to hurt the common people. Slowly, the situation started to deteriorate. On the city tower, Si Lian looked at everything in front of him. He clenched his right fist and cold sweat dripped down his forehead. He had a bad feeling. The common people were gathering and kowtowing on the ground. If this continued, it would definitely cause a mutiny. It seemed like he had to inform the higher-ups. Chapter 1845. Otherwise, as time went by, there would be countless casualties in Chang'an City, which was not something he could bear. Thinking of this, he slammed his palm on the black brick, glanced at the civilians and soldiers in the scuffle unwillingly, and then turned to look at the team on standby. "Spread out immediately and inform Mr. Wei Zheng, Mr. Zhang Sun Wuji, Mr. Fang Xianling, Mr. Du Ruhui, and so on. Inform all the officials in Chang'an City." After that, he seemed to think of something and said again, "Prepare the horse. I'm going to Marquis Lu's mansion right away." Without waiting for a reply, he quickly walked down the gate tower. At this time, the horse was already on his back. Si Lian jumped on the horse and rushed to Marquis Lu's mansion. "Get out of the way, get out of the way." He glared and kept shouting to the front, waving the horsewhip in his hand. Although the people in the discussion were crazy, they were not unafraid of death. Seeing the horse galloping, they knew that he was not someone to be trifled with, so they all made way. After half an hour, Si Lian smoothly arrived at Marquis Lu's mansion. "Quick, go and report to Marquis Lu. Something big has happened." Si Lian shouted to the servant at the door before dismounting, because in his opinion, this matter had reached the point where it could not be delayed. The servant's face changed. Knowing that something must have happened, he rushed into the mansion. Whoosh! Si Lian reined in the horse, dismounted, and jumped to Cheng's mansion. As soon as he entered the door, he heard an unhappy roar. "Is it that bastard? How dare he disturb Lao Tzu for no reason?" The voice was Qing Yaojin. He strode to the door and bumped into Si Lian. He frowned and said, "It's you, little bastard. Why do you come to me instead of guarding the gate of Chang'an City?" "Something big has happened, Marquis." Si Lian panted heavily as he looked at Qing Yaojin with a serious expression. Mother asterisk Kerr, what could possibly happen? Could it be that the sky has collapsed? Qing Yaojin was somewhat dissatisfied. He was originally practicing martial arts at home, but was disturbed by this brat. How could he not be angry? Duke, please calm down first. Shi Lian swallowed his saliva in an attempt to soothe his dry throat. He grabbed Qing Yaojin's left hand and pointed at the sky. Duke, look at what's in the sky. In the sky. Qing Yaojin frowned and was a little puzzled. What the hell are you doing? Although his mouth was unforgiving, he knew that Si Lian wouldn't dare to lie to him. Perhaps there really was something up in the sky. He glanced at the sky, and this glance instantly made him feel uncomfortable. But what is this? Qing Yaojin raised his right hand high and glared with his tiger-like eyes. Duke, I don't know either. Si Lian pulled a long face and said helplessly, now, the citizens of Chang and city are all saying that the thing in the sky is a jinx. They are all praying. Chang and city is already in chaos, and there are even casualties. What did you say? Qing Yaojin's body shook violently, and he slapped him with a backhand. He glared at him and said, why didn't you stop something like this from happening in Chang and city? As a duke, he had the responsibility to protect Chang. Now that something like this had happened, the first thing he thought of was order. Duke, you can't blame me for this. Si Lian touched his burning cheeks and felt wronged. Duke, I've already sent people to stop it, but there's little effect. The citizens are convinced that the jinx is a jinx, and they are close to going crazy. Then what are you waiting for? Take my waist token and go borrow soldiers from Big Hay. Qing Yaojin looked as if he expected better from Si Lian. He took out a waist token from his waist and threw it to Si Lian. Go find Big Hay immediately. I have to go to the palace to discuss this with Her Majesty. Without waiting for Si Lian to reply, he walked to the door and said, Cheng Yi, prepare a horse to go to the palace. When he arrived at the door, the horse was already prepared. Qing Yaojin jumped on the horse, held a long whip in his hand, and left in the direction of the palace. At the same time, in Wei Zheng's residence, groups of servants and maidservants gathered together. They pointed their fingers at the sky, their bodies trembling, and their mouths muttering something. What's that? That's the jinx, the legendary jinx. As soon as these words came out, the crowd exploded. Cries of surprise and pleas connected together. The entire front yard was like a sudden clap of thunder, and it was out of control. They were all ordinary citizens, and they had a deep fear of the jinx. Although this fear was passed down from the older generation, they finally understood what it was like after seeing it today. It was like the sky was falling and the earth was sinking. The cries of surprise in the courtyard became louder and louder until it spread throughout the Wei residence. Why are you crying out? A middle-aged man who looked like a servant walked out and pointed at the crowd. He was the steward of the Wei residence and was usually in charge of all matters in the residence, such as disciplining the servants. Usually, these fellows would refuse to do any work, but today, they actually had the leisure to talk about right and wrong. It seemed like they were really looking for a beating. Chapter 1846. Thinking of this, he quickly stepped forward and prepared to fight with the servant. Butler, butler, don't fight. Look at the sky. A servant timidly took half a step back and pointed to the sky, his face full of horror. The sky? The butler was a little confused. Is this guy trying to attract my attention? But this guy doesn't seem to be faking it, and these guys are all looking at the sky. Is there really something there? He looked at the sky with curiosity. In an instant, his pupils shrank, and his body trembled unconsciously. This is a jinx is coming to the world. The butler kept waving his hands, and his body became stronger and stronger. Master, master, something big has happened. As he shouted, he rolled and crawled to the study. Now that such a thing had happened, only a big shot like his master could control the overall situation. Otherwise, the sky would fall. Thinking of this, his steps became more urgent, and he almost stumbled. He hurried and finally reached the study. In the study, Wei Zheng was reading a book in one hand and holding a cigarette in the other. He was wandering in the sea of knowledge, and he paid no attention to the outside world. Master, something big has happened. The butler suddenly sat on the ground, as if he had exhausted all his strength. Wei Jing frowned and was a little dissatisfied. He hated being disturbed when he was reading, so he told the servants that no one could come in when he was reading. But now, why did this butler come in? Doesn't this guy know the rules? Impossible, this guy was the first to know. Did something happen? When he saw the butler sitting on the ground, he was more convinced that something big had happened. What the hell is going on? What happened outside? Wei Jing put down the book, suddenly sat up from the chair, and looked at the butler with a pair of bright eyes. Master, a jinx has appeared in the sky. People outside have been talking about it. With tears in his eyes, the butler said with a sad face. What? Wei Jing strode forward and stared at the helpless body of the butler. His face changed greatly. What did you just say? A jinx? Yes, master. An unknown object appeared in the sky. Everyone said it was a jinx. I guess the news has spread all over Chang city. The butler pointed to the sky and gestured as he spoke. Wei Zheng's face immediately paled. He hurriedly walked out of the door. He wanted to see if this so-called bane was real or fake. As soon as he walked out of the door, he couldn't wait to look up. At that moment, he felt as if the sky was about to collapse. It really was the star of calamity, and it was Mars. One had to know that Mars was an ominous star, also known as the Crimson Star, the Punishment Star, and the Enforcer Star. Because it was red in color and glowed like fire, it floated erratically in the sky, sometimes from west to east, and sometimes from east to west. Its situation was complicated and confusing, so historical records recorded it as Mars, which meant that it was a symbol of glowing fire and confusion. According to legend, the fall of the Pre-Qin dynasty had something to do with Mars. According to the records of Qin Shi Huang, for 36 years, Antares guarded the heart. There was a falling star in the East County, and the ground was a stone. Qian Shou carved the stone with the words, "The first emperor died and the ground was divided." When Qin Shi Huang heard of it, he sent the imperial censor to question it. None of it was convinced, and all the stones were taken away. He didn't have the slightest doubt about all this, because the thing in the sky was exactly the same as the Mars recorded in historical records. Wherever Mars appeared, the world would be in chaos. Looking at the place where Mars appeared, it was right above Chang city. Didn't that mean that the Tang dynasty was going to suffer a great disaster? What about the people of Chang city? What about the people of the world? His heart was filled with grief. He only felt darkness in front of his eyes and fell backward. Master. The butler strode forward and hugged Wei Zheng's bent body. Wei Jing took half a step back and slowly opened his eyes. His face was pale, and his hand was on the door frame. He faintly felt that something was wrong. Why did Mars appear above Chang city? Why did Mars appear at this time? Was this a sign of something? The appearance of Mars often had something to do with the people in power. It had been like this since ancient times. Every time Mars appeared, it was the time when the dynasty changed. Now that Mars suddenly appeared, could it be related to the current emperor, Li Erlang? He had killed countless people in the past, even his brother, and slaughtered the entire East Palace. Wasn't such a sin the most powerful evidence to prove Mars? Now that Mars had appeared, it was clearly accusing Li Erlang of wrongdoing. It was Mars brought by Li Erlang. It was the disaster brought by Li Erlang. It was also Li Erlang that caused the heavens to be dissatisfied. Wei Jing didn't dare to think about it anymore. He raised his trembling right hand and pointed in the direction of the palace, and said sternly, "Prepare the horse, we're going to the palace." After that, he walked out of the mansion with his bent body. He didn't dare to delay such an important matter, and he couldn't afford to delay it. Of course, he wasn't the only one with such thoughts. Zhang Sun Wuji also had such thoughts. Chapter 1847. At this time, Zhang Sun Mansion was in chaos. Since the servants knew that this was the star of calamity, no one worked anymore. Some stood in a daze, some knelt on the ground, praying in their hearts, and some jumped over the courtyard to escape. This was the star of calamity. Once it descended, the entire Tang dynasty would be in chaos. What was the use of staying in Zhangsun Mansion? It was better to go home and hide. The servants fled one after another, and the huge mansion withered in an instant. Zhang Sun Wuji stood in the front yard, looking up at the sky with fear on his face. His heart was very complicated. He already knew that this was Mars just now. At the same time, he also knew that wherever Mars descended, there would be disasters. But what crimes did the people of the Tang dynasty commit? What crimes did the people of the world commit? These were all done by Li Erlang. If he didn't kill his brother, how could this disaster happen today? Even the heavens couldn't stand it anymore and wanted to punish Li Erlang. The funny thing was that he was once Li Erlang's accomplice. But thinking about it, he and Li Erlang were relatives. How could he just stand by and do nothing? Men, prepare the horse. Zhang Sun Wuji waved his sleeves and walked straight out the door. He decided to go to the palace and ask Li Erlang for an explanation. Today's disaster was definitely related to him. Zhang Sun Wuji didn't say anything along the way. His face was gloomy, and it was hard to tell whether he was happy or sad. Only his trembling arms betrayed the fear in his heart. The coachman also knew the severity of the matter. He didn't dare to delay. With a wave of his whip, he rushed straight to the palace. Whoosh! The carriage stopped at the Vermilion Bird Gate, and Zhang Sun Wuji darted out of the carriage. Just as he was about to head into the palace, there was a commotion coming from not far away. He casually took a glance and saw that it was Wei Jing, Fang Xianling, and the others. Almost all the famous officials in the imperial court were present. Lord Wei, Lord Fang, why are you all here? Zhang Sun Wuji's face was still gloomy. The laughter between brothers in the past was gone. For Mars in the sky, of course. Wei Jing stood up with a walking stick in his hand. His face was pale. That's right. With the appearance of Mars, Your Majesty cannot escape responsibility. Fang Xianling glanced at the crowd, each word resounding. Zhang Sun Wuji nodded. He could not refute this point. Even if he was the emperor's brother-in-law, he could not be partial. Even Lu Guogong, Xing Yaojin, who was standing to the side, was silent because he deeply understood what the bane meant. Since all of you are of the same mind, let's enter the palace together. Zhang Sun Wuji swept his gaze across the crowd, and finally his gaze landed on Wei Jing. This was because he did not speak just now, which was not in line with this old man's character. However, with a glance, he realized that Wei Jing was a little different today. He could not help but ask, Lord Wei, I thought you don't usually use a crutch? Why today? Bang bang bang. Wei Jing slammed the crutch in his hand on the ground, but his face was pale. It's all because of Mars. After that, he glanced at the direction of the imperial study. His eyes narrowed slightly, and he looked intimidating. Let's go. Today, we must get an explanation from His Majesty. That's right. Today, we must get an explanation from His Majesty. Everyone, let's go. Everyone's expression was unfriendly as they walked straight to the palace gate. The guards at the palace gate were a little flustered. Why were all these court officials here today? Could it be that something big had happened? They were puzzled, but they did not intend to show favoritism. Without an audience with His Majesty, entering the palace gate was considered trespassing. That was punishable by death. Looking at the approaching court officials, the guard touched the Tang saber in his hand. His eyes revealed a trace of coldness. Halt, or you will be punished for trespassing. They knew that these were court officials, but without an audience with His Majesty, it was trespassing. As soldiers, they only followed orders and did not recognize the person. Of course, they were not really going to attack. They just wanted to stop these people and report back to His Majesty. After all, the person in front of them was more than 10 ranks higher than them. If they were to attack him, they might be raided tomorrow. They did not dare to take such a risk. What did you just say? Zhang Sun Wuji took a step forward. His eyes were half narrowed, and there was a chill in his gaze. Sir, you cannot trespass into the Vermilion Bird Palace gate. Looking at Zhang Sun Wuji's eyes, the guard was a little scared. The other party was an official more than 10 ranks higher than him. However, when he thought about it, if he allowed them to enter the palace without an audience, he and his brothers would be sentenced to death. Unknowingly, his courage grew. Sir, please show me your edict, or let the palace servants bring you in. Otherwise, please forgive my rudeness." After that, he pulled out the Tang saber at his waist. Then he swept a glance behind him. Everyone immediately understood and pulled out their Tang sabers in unison. All right. Wei Jing walked out of the crowd shakily with his walking stick. He laughed coldly. "Looks like you want to repeat the incident at the Black Tortoise Gate. Then I will wait for you here today." After that, he glanced in the direction of the Black Tortoise Gate. He seemed to be touched. Chapter 1848. The Gate of Black Tortoise was the place where Li Erlang killed his brother. It was also the place where Li Erlang rose to fame. Ever since Li Erlang ascended to the throne, no one dared to mention the Gate of Black Tortoise because it was taboo for Li Erlang. It was also a haze in Li Erlang's heart. But today, in front of all the officials, not only did he mention the Gate of Black Tortoise, he also humiliated the guards to express his anger. The officials behind him were not surprised by Wei Zheng's mention of the Gate of Black Tortoise. Instead, they felt that what he said made sense. If Li Erlang did not kill his brother, why would Mars be born today? All of this was related to Li Erlang. Everyone looked at the guards with anger. The anger in their hearts was self-evident. "What?" Wei Zheng's face darkened. He glanced at the guards and said coldly, "Didn't you want to take my life? Come on." Then he purposely took half a step forward, looking like a hero. The guards did not dare to be disrespectful. They knew how important this person was. If he dared to scold the emperor, then what about them? But if they retreated, how could they explain it to the emperor? Everyone looked at each other and didn't know what to do for a moment. Even the right hand holding the sword began to tremble. The veins on his forehead were bulging. "You bastards, get out of my way. Or else, I will tear you apart." Cheng Yaojin stood out with a pair of tiger-like eyes, looking like he was ready to fight at any moment. "That's right. Asking you to get out of my way is your honor. Or else, I will kill you right now." The Grand Scribe stood out as well. His right hand kept stroking the triangular blade on his waist. His bloodthirsty eyes scanned the guards. "This." The guards looked at each other, not knowing what to do. Seeing that the crowd was still blocking the way, the Grand Scribe was furious. He pulled out his tri-edge bayonet and walked towards the guards. "It seems that you refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. Today, I will send you to the Western Paradise." "Brother, wait for me." Cheng Yaojin clenched his fists, which made creaking sounds, and rushed forward like an arrow. This posture frightened the guards. The Grand Scribe? Duclos? The two big shots were actually fighting for the sake of entering the palace. Everyone knew that they were no match for them and fled into the palace. They had to report the situation here to His Majesty, or else they would lose their heads. Cheng Yang coldly snorted and glanced at the fleeing guards. He secretly spat. "Luckily you bastards ran fast enough, otherwise Lao Tzu would definitely cripple you." After he finished speaking, he seemed to have thought of something. He turned around and said with a serious expression, "Lord Wei, Lord Fong, Lord Du, please leave." Although he usually didn't like these guys, he still admired their attitude and appearance today, especially this Wei Zheng, who had a fearless face. Seeing that the palace door was no longer blocked, the officials all walked towards the palace door at the same time. They were heading towards the imperial study. Everyone was aggressive and had a serious expression. It was as if there was no one in the palace. Even if there were eunuchs and palace servants, when they saw this scene, they would stay far away for fear of attracting trouble. In a moment, they arrived at the door of the imperial study. At this time, little Gizi was standing at the door waiting for orders. When he saw the officials gathered, he was surprised. Why were so many officials gathered together? Could it be that something big had happened? However, he quickly suppressed the surprise in his heart. After all, he was His Majesty's personal eunuch. He couldn't be so ignorant. "Sirs, why are you all gathered here today? Do you have something important to discuss with His Majesty? Shall I inform His Majesty?" Little Gizi looked at the officials with a smile, nodding and bowing from time to time. Looking at these guys, it didn't look like anything good. It was better to be cautious. "Get lost." Cheng Yaojin's face darkened. He kicked him and said coldly, "What right does a eunuch like you have to speak? After speaking, he didn't wait for little Gizi's reaction and stepped into the imperial study. The other officials followed closely behind. Only little Gizi's screams could be heard. In the imperial study, Li Shimin, who was originally reading through memorials, suddenly raised his head when he heard the noise. He saw the officials standing uniformly in the main hall. Each of them had an unfriendly expression, as if they had encountered a disaster. Li Shimin put down the memorials and frowned as he glanced at the officials. He found that everyone was a little different from usual. Each of them had a serious expression. Even Qing Yaojin, who was usually laughing with him, had a serious expression. He didn't see anyone come forward to salute him. However, this wasn't important. Why did everyone come together and have such a serious expression? This made him a little puzzled. Could it be that he had made a mistake recently? Or did he neglect his political affairs? But he was dealing with political affairs now. His mind was constantly turning, trying to find if he had done something wrong. However, he couldn't find anything. He could only ask tentatively, "What's wrong with everyone today?" "Your Majesty, you are really leisurely. You even have time to read memorials now." Chapter 1849. Wei Jing took half a step forward and sneered. Li Shimin frowned and was puzzled. "Why do you say that? Does your Majesty not know what's going on outside?" Wei Jing snorted and asked in return. He did not believe that His Majesty did not receive any news in the palace. Outside? Li Shimin walked down from the dragon throne and glanced outside the door. He wondered, what could have happened outside? "Your Majesty, something big has happened outside. Mars has descended." Qing Yaojin took a step forward and looked at Li Shimin as he spoke. He originally did not know the 3 words Mars, and only found out after a discussion with the officials. "What? Mars?" Li Shimin's expression changed and his body trembled. He did not doubt Qing Yaojin's words, nor did he doubt the officials. Today's situation was not simple. Moreover, he deeply understood what Mars was. It was a star of misfortune. As long as Mars descended, it would be accompanied by disaster. However, why would Mars descend in Chang'e? Did he do something wrong? Thinking of this, he quickly walked to the entrance of the imperial study and looked up. Instantly, he felt as if the sky was about to collapse. It really was Mars. How could this be? Why would Mars descend from the sky? Could it be that he had killed too much? Was the heavens dissatisfied with him? Was this to punish him? He knew that the descent of Mars was often related to those in power. In the past, the descent of Mars would cause chaos. Could it be that his Tang dynasty was also going to be in chaos? His body trembled and he held the door frame with his hand, feeling helpless. Seeing this, Xiao Gizi hurriedly went forward and supported Li Shimin as they slowly walked towards the imperial study. Just as they walked into the hall, Wei Zheng's cold voice sounded. "Your Majesty, Mars has descended because you have killed too much in your early years. You should give the world an explanation." Wei Jing picked up his walking stick and slammed it on the ground with a look of indignation. He thought that it was impossible for His Majesty to only know about it now. It must be an act. But he didn't look like one. However, these were not important. What was important now was how His Majesty was going to answer to the people of the world. When the officials saw Wei Jing stand out, they began to criticize him. "That's right. Your Majesty has killed too many people. You must give the people an explanation. This Mars is a vengeful spirit of the Black Tortoise Gate, here to claim your life. Your Majesty, you should pay your respects. Not only that, Your Majesty, you should also issue an edict and admit your sins to appease the wronged souls." Everyone glared at Li Shimin, filled with righteous indignation, as if they were the souls who had been wronged. Hearing everyone's accusations, Li Shimin panicked. He leaned against the dragon throne, his face pale. Give an explanation to the people? The vengeful soul of the Black Tortoise Gate? His crimes have been decreed? These words hit him like a hammer in the chest. Normally, if the officials dared to say such things, they would have been punished. But today was different. The appearance of Mars meant that he was immoral and incompetent. But his crimes have been decreed? This was not an honorable thing. It could become a stain that he could not erase for the rest of his life. At this moment, he hesitated. What should he do? Was there anyone who could help him? He had never felt so helpless. Even when he led troops to war, he had never been afraid between life and death. But at this moment he was truly afraid. He was afraid that Mars really came because of him. He was afraid that everything the officials said, the vengeful spirit of the deposed crown prince, would come for his life. He was even more afraid that the people of the world would suffer because of him. Did he really have to admit that he was useless? Did he really have to admit that he had killed too many people? He was the emperor, how could he do such a thing? But who would speak up for him now? He was angry, heartbroken, and even regretful. Just as he was hesitating endlessly, a figure slowly appeared. Zhang Feng? Feng Zi was smart and had many wicked ideas. Perhaps he had a solution? At this thought, it was as if he had grasped at a life-saving straw. Hope flashed in his lonely eyes, and he immediately glanced at little Gizi. Little Gizi had been with him for many years and naturally understood, and slowly came over. Little Gizi, immediately send someone to White Deer College to find Zhang Feng. Tell him the situation here and ask him if he has any solutions. Li Shimin's face was pale, and his voice was hoarse. At this moment, he placed all his hopes on Zhang Feng. Little Gizi understood the severity of the matter, nodded, and left. At this moment, only the civil and military officials and Li Shimin were left in the hall. The atmosphere was very solemn and as calm as the surface of water. But if a stone was thrown, it would immediately cause a reaction. Your Majesty, please do not delay any longer. Immediately decree the crimes have been decreed. Wei Zheng's walking stick thumped on the floor, and he coughed as he spoke. He did not know why Li Erlang was still hesitating. These were the people of the world. Since Li Erlang claimed to be a wise ruler, why did he cast the people aside and ignore them today? Was he really so heartless? Chapter 1850. Your Majesty, please immediately issue an imperial edict. Your Majesty, there is no need to hesitate. The officials spoke up one after another, but there was not the slightest bit of respect in their words. Because in their view, Li Erlang had already lost his virtue. Only with the hearts of the people could he become a wise ruler. Right now, they spoke up only from the standpoint of themselves and the people. This included Zhangsun Wuji. Even though he was related to the imperial household and had only been friends with Li Erlang, he still had to make his stance clear on this matter. He had also planned the coup at Xuanwu Gate. If His Majesty refused to admit his mistake, the vengeful spirits would come for his life, and the Zhangsun clan would be the first to suffer. He could not bear the consequences. Of course, he was not the only one with such thoughts. Fang Xianling, Du Ruhui, Gao Shilian, Hou Junji, and Qing Yaojin all had similar thoughts. All of them had participated in the coup at Xuanwu Gate, and if the vengeful spirits came for their lives, none of them would be able to escape. Thus, they hoped that Li Erlang would admit his mistake. But Li Erlang clearly had no intention of doing so. Li Shimin felt powerless as he listened to the advice of the officials, and a chill ran down his spine. But he still had a sliver of hope, Zhang Feng. As long as Zhang Feng had a plan, the crisis before him could be resolved. Yes, it could definitely be resolved. He constantly comforted himself. His lonely eyes would occasionally glance at the door, hoping that this person who carried his hopes would bring good news. But the advice of the officials was getting more and more intense, and he had no choice but to reply. He could only raise his trembling right hand and wave it. Everyone withdraw for now. Allow us to reconsider. Reconsider? Wei Jing glanced at Li Shimin and coldly chuckled. Does Your Majesty not want to face the reality of Mars? After he finished speaking, he glanced at the officials behind him with a hint of disappointment in his eyes. In the past, all of you followed His Majesty to conquer the world, quelling the chaos and cleaning up the mess of the former Sui dynasty. It can be said that you have turned the tide and helped the building to collapse. Within the four regions, the Tang dynasty was ruled by Emperor Yang of Sui. At this point, he looked at Li Shimin and said coldly, however, the incident at the Xuanwu Gate, Your Majesty killed your brothers, usurped the throne, and bullied other people's wives and daughters. This is a crime that cannot be reversed. Does Your Majesty want to be slandered by the world? How could the officials face each other in the court? Are palace maids disloyal? You, Li Shimin pointed at Wei Zheng, his right hand trembling. His face turned green and white, but he could not say a word, because he knew that Wei Zheng was not wrong at all. But every word that he said hit him where it hurt. The incident at the Xuanwu Gate. The incident at the Xuanwu Gate was something that he did not want to talk about. He had killed his brothers there and used this method to usurp the throne. It could be said that it was a dark part of the imperial family's history. After the incident, he did not want to talk about this sad incident, and also to prevent the world from talking about it. But today, Wei Zheng brought this incident up again. His hands trembled and the veins on his forehead popped. He wanted to tear Wei Zheng apart. However, he couldn't because what the other party said was right. He had indeed done such a thing. Furthermore, there were many scholars in the world who had scolded him. Now, whether there was one more Wei Zheng or one less Wei Zheng, what did it matter? It was just one more person scolding him. Thinking of this, his eyes slowly dimmed, as if he had aged dozens of years. Minister Wei, let me think for a moment, okay? This was the first time he spoke to an official like this. He almost used a pleading tone because he knew that all the fault was on him. He could not blame anyone else. Even if Wei Zheng's tone was cold, it was also for the sake of the Tang dynasty. Think. Du Ruhui stood up. His stooped body showed that he was worried about the country and the people. Your Majesty, do you want the lives of the people in the world? Well, if your Majesty is not willing to give an edict, then I will kneel in the imperial study until I die. After that, he glanced at the officials with tears in his eyes. Everyone, your Majesty is hesitating now. I will kneel in the imperial study and wait for your Majesty to listen. As soon as he finished speaking, he waved his sleeves and walked out of the door with a righteous face. Seeing Du Ruhui like this, the other officials could not help but feel grief and indignation in their hearts and spoke one after another. Master Du, wait, I am also willing to kneel at the door of the imperial study with you. Yes, as the saying goes, establish a heart for heaven and earth and establish a life for the people. I will also go. Everyone followed Du Ruhui's footsteps and walked out of the door with a look of indignation. Soon, only Wei Zheng was left in the hall. He looked at Li Shimin with a complicated expression and turned to leave. In an instant, there was only one person in the imperial study. It was unusually quiet. Li Shimin looked at the silent hall and sat down on the dragon throne. His heart was full of grief, but he had no one to talk to. He slowly took out a cigarette from his waist with his trembling right hand, trying to numb himself with the cigarette. He took it out with a backhand, but there was no lighter. A wave of powerlessness came over him. Usually, for safety, little Gizi always carried the lighter with him. Now that little Gizi was not here, he could not even smoke. As the emperor, it was really ridiculous. Just as he was feeling sad, footsteps came from the door. Chapter 1851. Hearing this, Li Shimin raised his lonely eyes and glanced over. His heart was as taut as a bowstring. Right now, he could only hope that it was Zhang Feng or Zhang Feng who had come with a solution because only he could solve the current situation. The voice came closer and closer and became more urgent. Not long after, a figure stepped in. It was Xiao Gizi. Your Majesty, your servant has returned. Xiao Gizi strode forward and spoke as he walked, but his expression was very unsightly. Come quickly. Li Shimin abruptly stood up, but his trembling legs still made him feel weak. He held the table with his hand and asked expectantly, Has Zhang Feng been found? As he spoke, Xiao Gizi had already stepped onto the table, but he did not immediately reply. Instead, his brows were furrowed tightly as if he was thinking about something. His face was somewhat pale. Hurry up and speak. Li Shimin was a little impatient and hurriedly urged. Right now, he was treating Zhang Feng as a life-saving straw, but this dog of a slave still did not speak? Your Majesty, Xiao Gizi frowned and was a little flustered. Then, as if he had made up his mind about something, he carefully leaned over to Li Shimin's ear and whispered, Your Majesty, something has happened. Zhang Feng has disappeared. What? Li Shimin's eyes widened and his face paled. He did not dare to believe it. Say that again. Xiao Gizi frowned. When he heard this news, he was also shocked. When he came back, he was already thinking about how to tell His Majesty, but after thinking it over and over again, the news could not be hidden, so he planned to speak frankly. However, he did not expect His Majesty's reaction to be so big. "Your Majesty, Zhang Feng has disappeared." He lowered his head and timidly said, "Not only has Zhang Feng disappeared, but even Cheng Chumo, Zhang Sun, Chong and the others have disappeared." "What? They're all gone?" Li Shimon's eyes were wide open, and his face was completely pale. Zhang Sun Chong and Cheng Chumo's disappearance could still be explained as them being playful. After all, these two guys were still kids, but how could Zhang Feng disappear as well? One had to know that Zhang Feng was his life-saving straw. If he disappeared, then what should he do next? Was his crime already announced? Opening an altar to offer sacrifices to the heavens? Or announce his sins to the whole world? He sat powerlessly on the dragon throne, holding his forehead with his hand. He felt an unprecedented sense of helplessness. The oppressive atmosphere in the royal study made it hard for little Gizi to breathe. He understood the emperor's current situation, but he could not empathize with him. He could not help but feel sad. As the emperor's personal servant, he could not share the emperor's burden. He glanced at Li Shimin, and his eyes could not help but feel lonely. Just as he was about to go up and comfort him, he saw the crumpled cigarette on the table. Suddenly, a glimmer of hope ignited in his heart. Perhaps the cigarette could relieve the emperor's pain. Thinking of this, he quickly picked up the cigarette, smoothed it out, and handed it to Li Shimin. He said with concern, "Your Majesty, have a smoke. Perhaps it can help you forget those unhappiness?" Hearing this, Li Shimin's tightly closed eyes slowly opened. He rubbed his forehead with blue veins, looked at little Gizi, and nodded weakly. He knew that little Gizi was doing this for his own good. Moreover, he really did need the cigarette to relieve his tense nerves. Seeing the emperor nod, little Gizi was overjoyed. He quickly handed the cigarette over and lit it. The cigarette was slowly lit, emitting bursts of green smoke. Li Shimin took the opportunity to take a deep breath. The cigarette instantly entered his nose and stimulated his brain. Enjoying the stimulation of the cigarette, he half reclined on the dragon throne and began to recall what he had done in the past. "Big brother, fourth brother, are you really here to take my life? Or is the heavens dissatisfied with me?" Just as he was sinking into endless vexation, another set of footsteps came from outside the door. However, he was not in the mood to look at them at this time. On the other hand, little Gizi raised his head high, wanting to take a closer look. A moment later, a stooped figure slowly walked in. It was Zhang Sun Wuji, who had just knelt outside the door. Seeing this, little Gizi hurriedly went up to him and said softly, "Lord Zhang's." He knew that the emperor's relationship with the officials was tense. It was not convenient for him to speak. Naturally, he needed a mediator like him to pass on the message. Zhang Sun Wuji glanced at little Gizi and did not reply. Instead, he looked directly at Li Shimin with a complicated expression. "Your Majesty, the situation is very serious now. The officials are all waiting for your Majesty's reply. Has your Majesty made a decision?" He had been kneeling outside the door for a long time. Seeing that there was no news from Li Erlang and that the officials were anxious, as a relative of the emperor, he had to come in and ask. Li Shimin naturally knew what the other party was thinking. He raised his heavy head and glanced weakly at him. "Auxiliary machine, even you want to force me?" "Erlang." Zhang Sun Wuji looked at Li Shimin and choked a little. In the end, he didn't say those words because he couldn't bear it. After all, Li Erlang was his brother-in-law. The Tang dynasty could not do without the support of Zhang Xuan's family. Chapter 1852. Moreover, he and Erlang were friends. In those days, he followed Erlang to quell the rebellion and plan the change of the Xuanwu Gate. Strictly speaking, half of the ghosts of the Xuanwu Gate belonged to him. Now he was forcing Erlang. It was a bit too much. Moreover, it was reasonable to say that he also had a part of the responsibility for the appearance of Mars. He couldn't sit back and do nothing, but who could resolve this disaster? Thinking of this, a figure slowly emerged in his mind. Yuan Tiangang? Wasn't he a famous warlock of the Tang dynasty? Maybe this person could resolve the crisis. Erlang, I have a plan. Ask Master Yuan Tiangang to resolve this crisis. Zhang Sun Wuji said with some surprise. He had now regarded Li Shimin as a family member, so it was natural to call him Erlang. Besides, there were no outsiders now, so it didn't get in the way. Assistant, are you serious? Li Shimin stood up from the dragon chair and looked straight at Zhang Sun Wuji. He had thought that his only hope was shattered, but now it seemed that it was not. Erlang, Master Yuan is a famous warlock of the Tang dynasty. As long as he does divination, there may be a way. Zhang Sun Wuji's face was full of hope, and his eyes were shining. Good, good. Li Shimin nodded repeatedly, then looked at Little Gizi and hurriedly said, Little Gizi, you go to inform Yuan Tiangang and let him enter the palace. Little Gizi nodded and walked out of the door. In a moment he disappeared from the sight of the two. Looking at the receding figure, Li Shimin could no longer sit still. He slowly walked down from the hall, took a drag of the cigarette, and kept pacing in the hall. He was upset. He was a little worried. What if Yuan Tiangang couldn't do anything? What if Yuan Tiangang was not there? Now only Yuan Tiangang could save him. Seeing Li Shimin so anxious, Zhang Sun Wuji stepped forward and comforted him. Erlang, don't worry. When Master Yuan comes, everything will be clear. Hearing this, Li Shimin slowed down his steps and looked at Zhang Sun Wuji. He sighed and said with some sadness, maybe. After that, he took a deep puff of his cigarette and continued to walk around the hall. Zhang Sun Wuji didn't say anything else either. He clasped his hands behind his back and looked at the door from afar. Only the sound of footsteps could be heard in the huge imperial study. The atmosphere was a little tense. About half an hour later, the sound of footsteps came from outside the door. Hearing this voice, Li Shimin immediately stopped. His eyes kept looking out the door, hoping to see something. It wasn't that he didn't want to go out, but he didn't dare. With so many officials kneeling outside, if he went out, wouldn't he be torn apart alive? A moment later, two figures stepped into the imperial study. They were Little Gizi and Yuan Tiangang. Commoner Yuan Tiangang pays his respects to your majesty. Yuan Tiangang made a Taoist seal with his hands and bowed. Dispense with the formality, dispense with the formality. Li Shimin looked at Yuan Tiangang with surprise. He stepped forward and said directly, Master Yuan, I invited you here this time for the thing in the sky. I hope Master Yuan can divine it. He couldn't afford any delay now. He must solve it as soon as possible. Yuan Tiangang frowned and didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned his head and glanced at the unknown object in the sky. After a while, he said mysteriously, Yes, Your Majesty. Please prepare the incense table, candlesticks, and other sacrificial items. These are all trivial matters. Taoist priest, please do it quickly. Li Shimin promised and then looked at Little Gizi who was on standby. Little Gizi, send someone to prepare the incense table and candlesticks immediately. Be quick. Yes, Your Majesty. Little Gizi bowed and turned to leave. In less than a quarter of an hour, Little Gizi led several eunuchs to come with incense, candles, yellow paper, and other sacrificial items in his hands. Sacrificial activities were often held in the palace, so these things were necessary and not difficult to find. The incense table was neatly arranged under the command of Little Gizi. The candlesticks and yellow paper were also neatly placed at the door of the imperial study. Your Majesty, the ritual needs to be done outside the door. Please move. Yuan Tiangang bowed, still in a posture of making a Taoist seal. Li Shimin hesitated. There were so many officials outside the door. It was not easy to face them outside. But according to Yuan Tiangang's words, he couldn't do the ritual if he didn't go out. After thinking for a while, he made up his mind and nodded, Let's go. Now there was no other way. It was no big deal to come out and explain to the officials. With such an idea, Li Shimin slowly walked out of the door. As soon as he walked out of the door, he saw the officials kneeling together with an unyielding look, which made him a little sad. After all, these were the backbone of the Tang dynasty. He quickly stepped forward and said with concern, Officials, please get up. Hearing this, the officials raised their heads and looked at Li Shimin seriously. It seemed that they didn't intend to speak. Finally, Wei Xing, who was the leader, slowly said, "Your Majesty, have you decided?" In fact, they had seen Yuan Tiangang just now. They probably knew what the other party was here for. It was nothing more than preparing for divination and other things. However, divination could not solve this matter. Therefore, everyone still hoped that Li Shimin would issue an edict to appease heaven's anger. Chapter 1853. This, Li Shimin couldn't answer because he didn't make any decision at all. He had to cover it up and said, "Eunuch Wei, get up first. We'll talk about it later." Wei Jing glanced at Yuan Tiangang, who was not far away. His eyes were a little complicated. It seemed that His Majesty was going to pin his hopes on this warlock. Well, let's see what tricks he could play. He didn't reply to Li Shimin, but turned to look at the officials behind him and said sonorously, "Everyone, since His Majesty is going to open the altar, let's get up and watch." After that, he picked up the crutch beside him and slowly got up. Seeing this, Li Shimin quickly stepped forward and said while holding him, "Eunuch Wei, be careful." "Don't worry, Your Majesty." Wei Jing shook off Li Shimin's hand and stood up slowly with his crutch on the ground. Li Shimin asked for a snub and let go of his hand embarrassedly. In order to cover up his embarrassment, he glanced at the officials and said, "Everyone, please get up." While speaking, the officials had got up and stood behind Wei Jing. Of course, they got up not because of Li Shimin, but because of Wei Jing. In their hearts, Wei Jing was already a representative of virtue and prestige. Seeing that everyone had got up, Li Shimin turned to look at Yuan Tiangang and said seriously, "Master Yuan, can we start now?" "Your Majesty, we can start at any time." Yuan Tiangang made a Taoist gesture and nodded. "Then let's start." Li Shimin waved his hand. While speaking, he glanced at Wei Jing, intentionally or unintentionally, with a hint of inquiry. However, Wei Jing didn't seem to intend to speak. He just held the crutch in his hand and squinted his eyes, giving people a deep feeling. "Yes, Your Majesty." Yuan Tiangang nodded and waved his sleeves and walked to the incense table. He first glanced at the incense burner table and then glanced at the unidentified object in the sky. Then he slowly picked up the wooden sword on the incense burner table with his left hand and held it vertically in front of him. His right hand formed a seal and placed it in front of his nose as he began to chant. Wearing an imperial canopy on the head, walking on Kuei Gang, supporting Lu Jia on the left, Lu Ding on the right, Lu Ding on the right, Huang Shen in front, and Yu Zhang behind. As soon as the words left his mouth, his eyes snapped open. In that instant, they seemed to emit a bright light that was impossible to see or touch. Then, he began to brandish the wooden sword in his hand. First up, then down. It seemed disorderly, but in reality, it contained the universe within it. The 9 luminaries move in a straight line, the primeval origin lingers, the flower essence responds to the brightness, the primordial spirit disperses, the flowing infinite hope descends upon me, the radiant vermilion peak, the primordial spirit disperses, the flowing infinite hope descends upon me, the radiant vermilion peak, all things in the world, makes me a prophet. He once again placed the seal on the tip of his nose and urged the incantation with a serious face. At this moment, he seemed to have entered a state of selflessness. Everything around him had nothing to do with them. Everyone looked at this scene and didn't feel surprised because this wasn't the first time they had seen it. Every time the royal family offered sacrifices, they would let the official of the imperial astronomer perform the ceremony. Sometimes, they would invite Yuan Tiangang. Although they were used to this, they still had some doubts in their hearts. Could a few words of incantation really see through this supernatural thing? It sounded a bit mysterious. Although they all had doubts in their hearts, no one said it out loud. After all, this was passed down by their ancestors for thousands of years. Maybe there really was some magical power. Li Shimin didn't know about these different thoughts of everyone. At this time, he clenched his fists and stared with his eyes wide open. It seemed that he wanted to see something from such a ceremony, but unfortunately, he didn't see anything. He now completely pinned his hopes on Yuan Tiangang, or this ceremony, so he was the most nervous and didn't want anything to happen. At this time, he was like a tight bowstring that would break with a little carelessness. Moreover, as the emperor of the Tang dynasty, he must give the world an explanation, an answer, and appease the restless people. Otherwise, how could he face the people of the Tang dynasty in the future? Thinking of this, Li Shimin's face showed the sadness again. He subconsciously took out a cigarette from his waist and stretched out his slightly trembling right hand to touch the fire roll, but he didn't feel anything. At this time, little Gizi quickly took out the fire roll from his waist and handed it over respectfully. He was the close eunuch of His Majesty, so it was necessary for him to have sharp eyes. Since he knew that His Majesty liked this kind of thing, the fire roll at his waist had never been broken. Li Shimin glanced at little Gizi out of the corner of his eye and nodded slightly. He stretched out the cigarette, lit it slowly, and took a deep breath. This relieved his tense nerves. After a while of relaxation, he moved his eyes to Yuan Tiangang, who was performing the ceremony. Yuan Tiangang had adjusted the posture of the wooden sword in his hand, but he still kept chanting. Heaven and earth are natural. The filth is dispersed, the mystery in the cave, the Taiyuan is dazzling, and the gods in all directions make me natural. The talisman of Ling Bao tells the 9 heavens. As soon as he finished speaking, he respectfully looked at the wooden sword in his hand, then placed it on the incense table. He let out a long breath, took out 3 copper coins from his sleeve, and threw them on the incense table. Then, he clasped his hands together and began to chant. After a quarter of an hour, he slowly opened his eyes and looked at the copper wire. Chapter 1854. However, this result made Yuan Tiangang's pupils shrink, and his brows almost frowned together. Li Shimin noticed the abnormality and quickly stepped forward. "Master, what happened?" While speaking, he glanced at the copper coins on the incense table, but he couldn't understand them at all. He had to look at Yuan Tiangang and continue to ask, "Taoist, what is the meaning of this divination?" Everyone also looked at Yuan Tiangang nervously. Now, all hope was on this person. If it was really confirmed that Mars came to the world, then His Majesty couldn't escape the responsibility. However, Yuan Tiangang didn't answer, but stared at the copper coins as if he didn't hear Li Shimin's words. He didn't pretend not to hear, nor did he deliberately not answer, but this divination. This divination didn't show an ominous divination, but why did the people say that an ominous star came to the world? "Your Majesty, please look. This divination moves with thunder, disperses with wind, moistens with rain, suppresses with sun, stops with Zhen, speaks with Dui, Qian with the ruler, and Kuan with the hiding. Therefore, it is not an ominous divination." Yuan Tiangang pointed to the copper coins on the incense table and explained word by word. "Not an ominous divination?" Li Shimin frowned. If it was not an ominous divination, then why did the thing in the sky not disperse for a long time? "Master, are you sure?" He also hoped that it was not an ominous divination, but some of the things in front of him were too strange. None of them were right. The thing in the sky didn't disperse for a long time. Others said it was an ominous star and Mars, but Yuan Tiangang said it wasn't. But if it wasn't, why did the thing in the sky keep circling around Chang? It was really strange. Yuan Tiangang shook his head and didn't look back. "No, this is not an ominous star." As soon as this remark came out, it instantly caused an uproar. The originally quiet sight also boiled up in an instant, and the surprised voices of the officials were full. "Not an ominous divination? Is it really the vengeful spirit of Xuanwu Gate coming to take our lives?" "Yes, I think it must be. If it is not an ominous star, then there is only one possibility. Your Majesty must take responsibility." Everyone looked at Li Shimin angrily, as if he was being pointed at by 1,000 people. Since the object in the heavens was not Mars, then there was no doubt that it was the vengeful spirit of the Black Tortoise sect. The officials were convinced of this, because Li Erlang had killed too many people, and now he was receiving his retribution. "Everyone, please be quiet." Wei Jing stepped forward. Seeing that everyone had stopped talking, he took a step forward and said coldly, "Your Majesty, now that it's confirmed that it's not Mars, it must be the vengeful spirit of the Black Tortoise Gate. Please give the vengeful spirit an explanation, Your Majesty." He had once been a subordinate of the deposed crown prince, Li Jianxing. It was only after Li Jianxing had been killed that he had no choice but to submit to Li Erlang. Regardless of the past, since the Crown Prince and Prince of Qi had returned to demand his life, Li Erlang had to give an explanation. Not bad. Du Ruhui also stood up and looked at Li Shimin angrily. Now that it has been proven, Your Majesty, please give an explanation to the Black Tortoise Gate and the survivors. Your Majesty, please give an explanation to the Black Tortoise Gate. Your Majesty, please give an explanation to the Black Tortoise Gate. Your Majesty, please give an explanation to the Black Tortoise Gate. The crowd was united like never before, and their voices shook the heavens and the earth. Seeing such a situation, Li Shimin was scared out of his wits. His hands trembled uncontrollably, and cold sweat began to form on his forehead. Could it be that the officials were right? That the vengeful spirit of the Black Tortoise Gate had come to demand his life? No, it couldn't be. How could there be such a ridiculous theory? He kept on hypnotizing himself, convincing himself that it wasn't the vengeful spirit of the Black Tortoise Gate. Because he couldn't believe it. If it was really the vengeful spirit, how could he face his eldest brother and fourth brother? Vengeful spirit? Li Shimin's body trembled as he muttered to himself, "The vengeful spirit is here. What should I do?" Your Majesty, please don't panic. Yuan Tiangang hurriedly stepped forward and held Li Shimin. Your Majesty, I have a plan. Hearing this, Li Shimin seemed to have grasped a life-saving straw. His whole person became sober. He grabbed Yuan Tiangang and asked hurriedly, "Sir, do you have a brilliant plan? Tell me quickly." Issue an edict, open an altar to offer sacrifices to heaven, hold a Wadaland assembly, and expiate the vengeful spirit. Yuan Tiangang knew Li Shimin's current situation, so he had to tell him everything he knew. Yes. Li Shimin was a little flustered and didn't know what to do for a while. He said casually, "Issue an edict, open an altar to offer sacrifices to heaven, hold a Wadaland assembly, and expiate the vengeful spirit." As soon as his voice fell, there was a rush of footsteps not far away. A group of palace maids and eunuchs came one after another. In the middle was Zhang Sun Wugo's phoenix carriage. "Your Majesty," Zhang Sun Wugo began to roar before she reached him. Li Shimin looked in the direction of the voice and saw his wife. He seemed to see a glimmer of hope. "Maid Guanin, hurry up, hurry up." Zhang Sun Wugo kept urging the eunuchs carrying the phoenix carriage. Seeing that she was about to reach Li Shimin, she rushed down. Fortunately, she didn't fall. She quickly stepped forward, grabbed Li Shimin's hand, and hurriedly said, "Your Majesty, what's the situation now?" Chapter 1855. She was in the palace, so she naturally knew what was going on in the imperial study. However, it was inconvenient for her to come because the harem couldn't participate in politics. However, she was worried about Erlang, so she didn't care about the rules and came directly. "Guanyin maid." Li Shimin stroked Zhang Sun Wugo's tear-stained face and said sorrowfully, "It's the vengeful spirit of the Xuanwu Gate." Although he didn't want to admit it, the truth was in front of him. He couldn't refute it. "What?" Zhang Sun Wugo screamed. She couldn't believe the answer. How could it be the vengeful spirit of the Xuanwu Gate? Li Shimin didn't reply. Instead, he looked at Zhang Sun Wugo and nodded heavily. Now that things had come to this, he couldn't hide it anymore. It was better to make it clear. Seeing Li Shimin's expression, Zhang Sun Wugo felt as if she was hit by a heavy hammer. Cold sweat flowed down her forehead. She felt a sense of powerlessness. Suddenly, her vision turned black and she fell backward. "Guanyin maid." Li Shimin hugged Zhang Sun Wugo and kept shaking her. His voice was a little hoarse. After a violent shake, Zhang Sun Wugo slowly opened her beautiful eyes. She looked at the person in front of her and grabbed Li Shimin's wrist. Her face was a little pale. "Your Majesty, what should we do now?" "According to Master Yuan, I need to announce the punishment." Li Shimin looked at Zhang Sun Wugo and said with a sorrowful face, "Your Majesty, how can you make such a sacrifice?" Zhang Sun Wugo suddenly stood up. Her face was full of disbelief. "Sigh." Li Shimin sighed and said helplessly, "This is the only way now." "How could this be?" Zhang Sun Wugo's face was pale. Cold sweat flowed down her forehead. She glanced at the civil and military officials on the ground and her husband in front of her. She really believed the vengeful spirit of the Xuanwu Gate. So many civil and military officials were present, and even the famous Yuan Tiangang of the Tang dynasty was doing divination. It seemed that things had come to an irreversible point. She could be considered as the second beneficiary of the Black Tortoise Gate's change. Now that Erlang was in trouble as the Empress, how could she sit by and do nothing? Thinking of this, she wiped away the tears that were about to fall from the corners of her eyes. She looked at Li Shimin and said seriously, "Your Majesty, this concubine is willing to go to Hua Sheng Temple to kneel in front of the Buddha and recite sutras for 7 days to help the souls of those who have died." Once these words were spoken, the officials who were originally indignant couldn't help but feel that the Empress seemed to be more pleasing to the eye. Li Shimin didn't think so. This was his wife. When he thought of his wife praying to Buddha for what he had done, he couldn't help but feel touched. "Guanyin maid, Your Majesty." Zhang Sun Wugo slowly pushed Li Shimin away and said with concern, "Your Majesty, please personally preside over the Water and Land Assembly and release the souls from purgatory." "Good, Zhen will preside over the Water and Land Assembly." Li Shimin nodded heavily. Now that the Empress could make such a sacrifice, as the Emperor, of course, he had to set an example. "Thank you, Your Majesty." Zhang Sun Wugo bowed and then turned to walk towards the Phoenix carriage. Now she didn't dare to delay. Every moment she went to Hua Sheng Temple meant that she could release one more soul. Watching the Empress figure gradually disappear, Li Shimin withdrew his gaze and looked at the officials. With a solemn expression he said, "Wei Zheng, write an edict for Zhen. Zhang Sun Wuji, prepare for the Water and Land Assembly. Shu Jindo, the Imperial Astronomer, prepare for the sacrificial ceremony." "Yes, Your Majesty." The officials looked at each other, and the expressions on their faces finally eased a bit. "In that case, everyone can go and prepare." Li Shimin had a bitter expression as he responded. Finishing, he turned and walked towards the Imperial Study. After returning to the Imperial Study, he sat weakly on the dragon throne. He slowly took out a cigarette from his waist and put it in his mouth. Little Gizi hurriedly took out a match and lit it. He took a deep breath and tried to relax himself. Now that the dust had settled, the edict had been issued, the preparations for the Water and Land Assembly had begun, and the sacrificial ceremony was about to begin. He had given an explanation to the people of the world. But this also confirmed that he was incompetent and had killed the innocent. But what else could he do? He glanced at the officials who had left the Imperial Study. Waves of helplessness spread through his body. The officials had forced him to abdicate. The people were at odds with him. This was a last resort. He hoped that after the storm, the people of the world would forget about this matter. Even if he broke his teeth and swallowed it down, he couldn't find anyone to talk to because he could only blame himself for this matter. These were the souls of Xianwu sect. Basically, each one of them was his family. Yet these family members had died under his blade. Now that they were coming for his life, what could he blame them for? He could only silently endure it. But if Feng Zi was here, he might be able to turn the tide. That guy had a lot of ideas. Thinking of Feng Zi, he suddenly trembled. He seemed to have thought of something. Feng Zi was missing? That guy hadn't shown up. Could it be that something had happened? Ever since he met Zhang Feng, he deeply understood his talent. It could be said that he was one of a kind in the Tang dynasty. He had also become friends with him. Unknowingly, Zhang Feng had also become one of the most important people in his life. Chapter 1856. Now that he was missing, how could he not be worried? If something happened to him, what would happen to White Deer College? What about the workshop? What about the research institute? Who else would help him? Who else in the world would speak up for him? What about the Tang dynasty? No. He didn't dare to think about it anymore. He only felt his body tremble. Little Gizi immediately asked Qing Yaojin to go to White Deer College to find Feng Zi. No matter what, we must find her. Li Shimin stood up and raised his trembling right hand. He was a little emotional. Your Majesty, are you okay? Little Gizi hurriedly went forward to support Li Shimin and asked worriedly. I'm fine. Li Shimin shook his head and hurriedly said, quickly send Qing Yaojin to find Feng Zi. Yes, Your Majesty. Little Gizi nodded, But he didn't leave immediately. Instead, he looked at Li Shimin and asked worriedly, "Your Majesty, President Zhang went missing with Chung Chumo and Zhang Sun. If you ask High Duke Lu to find them, is it?" He didn't finish his sentence because eunuchs couldn't participate in politics. He just wanted to remind His Majesty. What if Cheng Yaojin caused trouble? "It's fine. Just do as I say." Li Shimin waved his hand and didn't care so much. In his opinion, once Chung Chumo went missing, Cheng Yaojin would be the most anxious. He would definitely do his best to find them. Besides, the news couldn't be hidden. He would find out sooner or later. "Yes, Your Majesty." Little Gizi nodded. Although he was worried about His Majesty, he didn't dare to disobey. He could only quickly walk out of the imperial study, hoping to help His Majesty a little more. Thinking of this, he quickened his pace and walked towards the Vermilion Bird Gate. As he walked, he kept looking around, as if he was looking for something. At this moment, a figure not far ahead attracted his attention. High Duke Lu, wait." Little Gizi kept waving his hands and screaming at the top of his lungs. Cheng Yaojin was just about to go out when he suddenly heard someone calling him. He subconsciously glanced back and saw that it was Little Gizi. He asked doubtfully, "Little Gizi, why did you call me?" "Grand Duke, His Majesty has something to tell you." Little Gizi arrived in front of Cheng Yaojin, panting heavily. "Do you have any orders for me?" Cheng Yaojin asked subconsciously. Then, he felt that something was not right. Puzzled, he asked, "What can Your Majesty order me to do?" "Big news. Zhang Feng is missing." Xiao Gizi cried out in surprise. He knew Zhang Feng's position in His Majesty's heart and naturally did not dare to slight him. "What? Feng Zi is missing?" Cheng Yaojin's eyes widened as he grabbed Xiao Gizi's collar in disbelief. "What's going on?" "Duke, let go of this servant first." Xiao Gizi tugged at Cheng Yaojin's arm and was a little out of breath. "Speak quickly." Cheng Yaojin let go of Xiao Gizi with a malevolent expression. Xiao Gizi tugged at his collar and hurriedly said, "His Majesty just sent people to find Zhang Feng, but there was no one in White Deer College. He should be missing." "Missing? How could he be missing?" Cheng Yaojin cried out in surprise. Then, he seemed to have thought of something and hurriedly said, "Then what about my son? He's always with Feng Zi. Now that Feng Zi is missing, what about my son?" His son was currently working under Zhang Feng. If Zhang Feng was missing, then what about his son? Would he be missing as well? These were all possibilities, so he had to ask clearly. Xiao Gizi was a little guilty. He knew Cheng Yaojin's temper. If he said something wrong, he would beat him up. If he said it now, he might end up with a black nose and swollen eyes. "What is this? Hurry up and if *King say it." Cheng Yaojin waved his clenched fists impatiently, as if he was going to beat someone up at the slightest sign of something wrong. "Duke, please calm down." Xiao Gizi hurriedly fawned over him and smiled charmingly. "Duke, your son went missing with Zhang Feng." "What?" Cheng Yaojin widened his eyes in disbelief. In his eyes, his son was the lifeblood of the Qing family. He couldn't go missing and he wasn't allowed to go missing. Now that something had happened to him, he couldn't accept it. "You bastard, why didn't you say so earlier?" He cursed silently. Then, without waiting for Xiao Gizi's reaction, he turned and walked out of the palace gates. He quickly walked out of the palace gates, jumped onto his horse, and galloped towards White Deer College. Behind him were dozens of Qing Residence's retainers. At this moment, the situation on Chang and Main Street was slightly better. It wasn't as chaotic as before, and the roads were cleared. Cheng Yaojin galloped towards White Deer College. There weren't any obstructions on the way. Cheng Yaojin arrived at White Deer College in a short period of time. He jumped off his horse and rushed towards the college. "Where is everyone? Where did they all die?" He started to shout as soon as he reached the field. "Who's making such a big fuss?" Yu Shinan walked out of the classroom with some dissatisfaction. He looked towards the source of the sound and saw Cheng Yaojin. He frowned. "What are you shouting for?" Chapter 1857. When Cheng Yaojin saw Yu Shinan, it was as if he had seen his savior. He was delighted and quickly ran forward. "Old man Yu, what did you call me?" Yu Shernan frowned and was very dissatisfied. This guy did not know how to respect people when he opened his mouth. He had already despised this guy. Mr. Bo Shi. Cheng Yaojin also quickly noticed that something was wrong with Yu Shernan. He quickly changed his words and said, Mr. Bo Shi, have you seen my son? He had completely thrown Zhang Feng to the back of his mind and was only thinking about his son. Your son? Yu Shernan frowned and said doubtfully, you should go home to find your son. Why did you come to the academy? He had never liked this rude guy. He even called him old man just now. He did not have a good impression of him. Now he was looking for his son and found the academy? How improper. Although he was dissatisfied, he still responded with his mouth. Oh, my son is missing. Cheng Yaojin was so anxious that he stamped his feet, but he could do nothing. He knew that the old man in front of him did not even need to salute to his majesty. He could not do anything to him. Go home to find your son. Don't yell in the academy. Otherwise, old man will report you. Yu Shernan snorted and turned to leave. He did not want to stay with this illiterate guy for another quarter of an hour. Old man Yu, Cheng Yaojin stretched out his right hand and called out unwillingly. However, Yu Shernan did not intend to look back. Looking at the disappearing figure, he glared at him and was somewhat dissatisfied. When he was about to walk to the other classrooms, a figure slowly walked towards him. There's a chance. Cheng Yaojin smiled and was somewhat proud. He crossed his hands and blocked the door of the classroom. Boy, wait. The person suddenly looked up and was somewhat puzzled. You are? Don't ask who I am first. Cheng Yaojin waved his hand and put on an intimidating look. Let me ask you, are you from the academy? Why do I feel like I've seen you there before? That's right. My name is Yuan Hong. I was the flag bearer for the previous basketball match. The person replied timidly. He knew that the academy often came to look for the dean. The person in front of him was probably one of them. He couldn't afford to offend him. Perhaps he could use the basketball game to suppress his arrogance. Yuan Hong? Cheng Yaojin raised his head and muttered to himself. Then, he looked at Yuan Hong and revealed a malicious expression. Let me ask you, where did your dean go? Now that old man Yu was out of the question, he had already offended him. He could only find some clues from these students. Yuan Hong scratched his head as if he was thinking about something. After a while, he said slowly, I remember now. The last time the dean went to the research institute, he hasn't returned until now. There were also a few people from the workshop who went with him. Research Institute. Cheng Yaojin's eyes darted around. He finally found some useful clues, but it wasn't enough. Do you know what they went to do? I don't know. How can we ask about the dean's business? Yuan Hong shook his head and was a little nervous. If you don't know, why are you talking about it? Seriously. Cheng Yaojin secretly spat. He glared at Yuan Hong and walked straight to the entrance of the academy. Only a petrified back view was left. So he was the one who told the other party the news and got scolded? What was this? Yuan Hong shook off the dissatisfaction in his heart and walked to the classroom. Looking back at Cheng Yaojin, he took the reins from the servant and ran straight to the research institute. Now that there was news, he couldn't slack off. What if his son was in danger? What if Zhang Feng had some bad idea to bring his son along? Then his Cheng family would be ruined. Thinking of this, he became even more anxious. He whipped the back of the horse and galloped away. A moment later, Cheng Yaojin arrived at the entrance of the research institute. He jumped off the horse and rushed in. Is there anyone? Is there anyone? He shouted at the top of his lungs, trying to find someone he knew. Coincidentally, Ma Zhou and Hao Chujun were on the field. When they heard the shout, they subconsciously glanced over. Who is it? What are you shouting about? It's you too. Cheng Yaojin looked in the direction of the voice. It was as if he had discovered a new continent. This was because he still remembered the scene of Zhang Feng scolding these two fellows. Who are you? Do we know you? Hao Chujun looked at Ma Zhou with a face full of question marks. The two of them were waiting here for their teacher. In the end, this person came over. They didn't know him at all, but he was still trying to worm his way into being friends. You don't need to know who I am? Cheng Yaojin waved his hand generously as if to say that he didn't care. Then he quickly said, "Where did your teacher go? And my son?" "Teacher." Ma Zhou frowned and glanced at the sky. Teacher had brought Chengchumo and the others to the sky and hadn't come down yet. How was he going to tell others? Could it be that teacher had researched the flying artifact and gone to the sky? No one would believe that. Chapter 1858. Looking at Ma Zhou's actions, Chen Yaojin also subconsciously glanced at the sky. He felt that something was wrong, but he couldn't see what it was. He could only urge, "Where did Feng Zi go?" This, Ma Zhou looked at Hao Chujun, his eyes somewhat evasive. Hao Chujun naturally understood. He looked at Qing Yaojin and smiled. "My teacher has something to do and will not be back for a while." This was just him making things up. In fact, even he himself didn't know when his teacher would come back. Cheng Yaojin naturally saw the two's little actions. He was very suspicious that the disappearance of Feng Zi and his son was definitely related to these two guys. "Then what about my son, Qing Tinio?" "Oh, your son. He also went with my master." Hao Chujun lied without blushing. "Went out together?" Qing Yaojin was somewhat doubtful. His son would discuss everything with him. This time he actually dared to hide it from him. This was impossible. He looked at the two of them unwillingly, trying to find some clues. At this time, the iron wire under their feet and the brazier attracted his attention. "What is this?" Cheng Yaojin pointed at the iron wire on the ground and asked. This is something we got to play with." Hao Chujun laughed and was about to pick up the thing on the ground. This thing belonged to his teacher. He couldn't let this guy ruin it. "Let me see." Cheng Yaojin snatched the iron wire from Hao Chujun's hand. He had a feeling that Feng Zi's disappearance was related to this guy in front of him. Moreover, these two guys were protecting the iron wire. Maybe there was some conspiracy. "I can see that you two are not honest. Were you lying to me just now? Tell me." "Why would we lie to you?" Hao Chujun smiled. "You are Brother Tinia's father, which means you are our father." After saying that, he gave Ma Zhou a look, wanting him to say something good. Ma Zhou understood and quickly stepped forward. He smiled and said, "Yes, you are Tinio's father. Why would we lie to you?" As he spoke, he reached out to grab the iron wire in Qing Yaojin's hand, trying to take it back. However, this guy was too strong and couldn't move it at all, so he could only give up. "Stop trying to bewitch Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu won't fall for it." Cheng Yaojin glared at the two of them and waved the wire in his hand. "Lao Tzu thinks that the disappearance of Feng Zi and my son is related to the two of you. If you don't tell me, Lao Tzu will punish you right now. We really don't know." Ma Zhou pulled a long face and said in a pleading tone, "You just said that Feng Zi went on a long trip, and now you say that you don't know. There is indeed a problem." Cheng Yaojin sneered. After saying that, he put down the iron wire in his hand and rolled up his sleeves. It seemed that he was about to go all out. "What are you doing? You can't mess around." Ma Zhou's expression changed and he stepped back. "This is the Research Institute. You can't behave atrociously here." "Yes, this is the Research Institute. You can't mess around." Hao Chujun was also a little scared and stepped back. "Can't mess around?" Cheng Yaojin sneered and said indifferently, "Lao Tzu doesn't care about you." After saying that, he strode forward, grabbed Ma Zhou's arm, and threw him over his shoulder. Ma Zhou was a scholar. How could he withstand Cheng Yaojin's torment? He immediately fell to the ground and wailed. Seeing this, Hao Chujun's face changed. He was about to run away when Cheng Yaojin used total annihilation. Hao Chujun fell forward and fell on his face like a dog eating mud. Lao Tzu could beat 10 of you back then." Cheng Yaojin glanced at the two people on the ground with disdain. After saying that, he pulled Ma Zhou's left leg with his left hand and Hao Chujun's right leg with his right hand. He pulled the two people together, then picked up the iron wire on the ground and tied their left and right legs together. "Okay, are you willing to talk now?" Cheng Yaojin sat on the ground and looked at the two people in front of him who were somewhat aggrieved. He smiled. "Brother, please let us go. We really don't know anything." Hao Chujun wiped the dirt from the corner of his mouth and begged. "Shut up." Cheng Yaojin roared. Just now, he was trying to talk nicely to these two guys. In the end, these two guys refused to listen to him. now that they had been defeated, they were still so stubborn. Did they not know the feeling of losing a son? They really had a heart of stone. You two dogs. Now that my son is missing, of course you are not worried. But I am. I don't care if you are Feng Zi's disciples or not. If you don't talk, Lao Tzu will throw you under the tree for 3 days and 3 nights. I guarantee that you will become dry corpses. After saying that, he glanced at the locust tree on the side of the field and said with a fierce look, "How about it? Are you going to talk or not?" This, Ma Zhou trembled and looked at Qing Yaojing. He didn't know what to say. He was very afraid that this guy in front of him would really hang him under the tree. How could he establish a foothold in the institute in the future? However, he was afraid that if he said it, his teacher would be unhappy and expel him from the institute.